Tonight, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 of the most disturbing road trip horror stories across Texas that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The stretch of highway that cut through central Texas could feel like a punishment to anyone driving it after midnight. It was long and flat, broken only by the occasional glow of distant towns or the sad flicker of neon clinging to some old roadside diner that never closed. Jacob had been on the road since noon, pushing his aging Ford sedan from Houston toward the Panhandle, and fatigue was seeping into his bones. His hands were stiff on the steering wheel, his eyes blurry. He hadn't seen another car in 20 minutes. When the gaslight chimed, a low amber glow spreading across the dash, his gut tightened. He hadn't passed a station in 50 miles. He muttered to himself and checked the road ahead, dark and endless, wondering if he'd end up coasting into a ditch before finding fuel. That was when he saw the sign. Mile 283. The green metal marker gleamed in his headlights, and just beyond it stood a warped wooden billboard that looked like it had been there for half a century. Gerstender food. Rest, it declared in peeling white paint. An arrow pointed right. Jacob slowed, turned off the highway, and followed a cracked asphalt road. It ran about half a mile through dry mesquite and weeds before opening into a gravel lot with a single station. Two old pumps stood like relics from the 70s, chipped red paint and long black hoses curling like dead snakes. A canopy hung above, the fluorescent bulbs humming but dim. The building behind them was squat and square, with dirty windows and a hand-painted sign reading simply, 283 gas. He pulled up to the first pump, rolled down his window, and leaned out. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust. For a moment he wasn't sure the place was even open. The lot was empty, no cars, no sound but the low buzz of insects circling the lights. Then the door creaked open. A man stepped out, thin, tall, wearing gray coveralls that might have once been blue. He moved stiffly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and when he came close, Jacob saw the face. It looked wrong at once, though he couldn't place why. The features were pale, waxy under the canopy light. The eyes caught Jacob's attention and held it. They were wide, too wide, and the pupils didn't move. Jacob waited for a blink, but none came. The man's smile stretched unnaturally across his cheeks as he lifted a hand in greeting. The hand looked rough, scarred, but real enough. Jacob forced a laugh to break the silence. "Evening," Jacob called. "Still open?" The man nodded once. His mouth moved slowly, shaping words in a flat, gravelly tone. "Pump's working. Cash only." Jacob glanced at the pump, saw no card reader, and nodded. He had some cash folded in his wallet. As he stepped out of the car, the night felt heavier, the air pressing down. He looked again at the man. Up close, the illusion was worse. The eyes weren't eyes at all, but painted glass, glossy and still, staring forward with no light behind them. It was like looking at a mannequin in a store window. Yet the man breathed. His chest rose and fell. His lips shifted again. How much? Jacob's mouth had gone dry. He wanted to leave, to get back in the car, to push forward on fumes until he found someplace normal. But the needle on his gauge was nearly kissing the empty line. He swallowed. $20. The man took the bill from Jacob's hand with rough fingers. They were warm, too warm like fevered flesh. He slipped the money into his coveralls, then lifted the pump handle. Jacob tried not to stare but couldn't help it. The eyes never blinked, never shifted. They just bored forward into the dark, as if painted there to guard the night. The man inserted the nozzle and began pumping. The sound of fuel rushing filled the silence. The station sign flickered above them, letters buzzing. Jacob shoved his hands into his pockets and tried to convince himself that there was some explanation. Maybe the man had been burned or suffered some accident. Maybe those weren't painted eyes but prosthetics, something medical. But no prosthetic looked like that. They weren't set right in the skull. They were painted, flat, perfect circles of black and blue ink on glass. And still the man smiled faintly, as if amused by Jacob's discomfort. When the pump clicked, the man pulled the handle out and hung it back. "Tank's full." He stepped away, back stiff as if his joints didn't quite work right. Jacob reached for the door handle, but before he could climb in, the man spoke again. "Long road ahead. Don't stop again until daylight." The words hung in the air, heavy as stones. Jacob managed a nod, though his throat had locked. He slid into the driver's seat, started the car, and pulled away. As his headlights swept across the lot, he caught sight of something that made his chest seize. In the far corner of the gravel, half hidden by weeds, sat 3 cars. They were old models, covered in dust, tires flat, windshields cracked. Their doors hung open, empty, abandoned. He pressed harder on the gas, back onto the cracked road, back toward the highway. He didn't look in the mirror until he was moving 70. When he did, the lot was dark. The pumps, the building, the man, all gone. Jacob drove until dawn, hands trembling on the wheel. When the sun finally rose, he spotted another modern station ahead. He pulled in, eager to wash the night away, to see something normal. As he unscrewed his cap, he froze. The gauge on his dash still read full. He looked at the nozzle in his hand, then down at the ground. No smell of gasoline. No stains under the car. He hadn't bought fuel at all. Yet in his pocket, his wallet was $20 lighter, and on the back seat, folded neatly as if left there on purpose, was a rag streaked with dried paint, the color of deep, unblinking eyes. Highway 59 has always been a long, lonely stretch of road. One of those Texas highways where the land seems to flatten out forever, and the darkness feels heavier than anywhere else. The small towns it slices through are scattered and tired, places that people leave more than they arrive. Their gas stations and motels clinging to life by habit more than profit. Nights there are strange, especially when the fog rolls in. A heavy, pale curtain that hangs so low you can barely see your own headlights in front of you. Drivers know to take it slow, not because of the wildlife or the road itself, but because of the stories. Out here, the highway has a reputation, and at the center of all of them is the bus. It's not marked on any record. No school district in Texas has claimed it. No scrapyard ever hauled it off, but anyone who's driven Highway 59 on a foggy night has heard about it. The white bus, they call it, though that isn't right. It isn't really white anymore. If you ever see it at all, it's closer to a pale bone-colored husk of a vehicle, like the paint has been drained of life. They say it drives itself, rolling along the shoulder of the road with no headlights on, just the outline of its bulk appearing and vanishing in the mist. Some swear they've pulled over to let it pass, only to realize the driver's seat is empty. Others claim they've heard laughter trailing behind it, the kind of high-pitched laughter only children make when they're excited, except the sound is warped, tinny, like it's being played from an old recording that's been stretched and broken. One of the people who knew the story best was a man named Henry Cole, a trucker who had been running loads across Texas for 30 years. Henry wasn't the kind of man to buy into ghost stories. He'd laughed off plenty in his time, from phantom hitchhikers to haunted diners, but he never laughed when it came to the bus. Years back, one night in early spring, Henry swore he saw it for himself. He'd been driving northbound just past Shepherd, fog thick as wool, when he caught movement in his mirrors. Something massive rolling behind him without lights. At first, he thought it was another rig, a reckless one at that. But as the mist thinned, he realized it wasn't a truck at all. It was a school bus, long and low, crawling steadily up the road with its windshield black as tar. He said it pulled up alongside him for half a mile, coasting smooth as if it didn't touch the ground. When Henry finally dared to look, he saw the passenger seats inside filled, row after row of children sitting silently, faces pale and mouths stretched into grins too wide to be natural. He looked away, and when he gathered the nerve to glance back, the bus was gone, dissolved into the fog like it had never been there. Henry never drove that stretch after dark again. He told the story in truck stops, warning rookies that if they heard laughter in the mist, they should keep their eyes on the road and never, under any circumstance, pull over. The way he told it made people believe him, even if they didn't want to. But people are curious. That's always the problem. They want to prove what others won't to see if the stories are true. Last year, a group of teenagers from Livingston decided they were going to find the bus. They loaded into an old Ford pickup with a couple of cameras and a cooler of beer, telling themselves they'd make a video for YouTube. They wanted proof, something viral, something that would get them noticed. They picked a night in November when the fog was rolling heavy, the kind that made the trees along the highway look like black skeletons. They drove slow, windows down, recording everything. For the first hour, nothing happened, just fog and the steady thrum of tires. One of them joked that the bus must be scared of being filmed. That's when they heard it, the laughter. Thin and faint at first, but getting closer. The sound didn't come from the woods or the radio. It seemed to float above the pavement, following them no matter how fast they went. They slowed, and the sound grew clearer, sharper, like it was right behind them. They all turned at once, and that's when they saw the shape emerging through the mist. A school bus, its paint pale, headlights dead, rolling straight at them with no driver in the seat. Inside the windows, children pressed their faces against the glass. The teens screamed, swerving onto the shoulder, gravel spitting under the tires. The bus should have passed them, but it didn't. It slowed, almost matching their speed, coasting alongside with its windows rattling. One of the boys swore the kids inside were chanting something, though he couldn't make out the words. Another claimed he saw a figure at the back of the bus, taller than the rest, hunched low as if it didn't belong among the children. When the truck finally lurched to a stop, the teens jumped out, desperate to escape, but the fog swallowed them quick. They called to each other, voices muffled and panicked, yet none of them could see more than a few feet ahead. The bus was gone, but the laughter wasn't. It circled them in the mist, bouncing from tree to tree, growing so loud it drowned out their own shouts. By dawn, only the pickup was found, parked sideways on the shoulder with the doors hanging open and the cameras still recording. The kids weren't inside. They weren't anywhere. Their families searched. The sheriff's department combed the woods, but all that was ever recovered were their shoes, lined up neatly on the white line at the edge of the highway. Since then, the bus has been seen more often, as though it's grown hungrier. Some say it's the ghosts of children killed in a crash decades ago, forgotten by the state and left to rot in some shallow ditch. Others whisper it's something older, something that uses the bus like a mask to draw people in. Nobody agrees on what it is, but everyone agrees on one thing. If you're driving Highway 59 at night and you hear children laughing through the fog, don't look in your mirrors. Don't pull over. Don't even breathe too loud. Just keep driving no matter how much your instincts scream at you to stop. Because once the white bus finds you, it doesn't let go. And if you make the mistake of climbing on, you won't just vanish. You'll ride forever, grinning with the others, waiting for the next poor soul to lose themselves on that endless stretch of Texas highway. The sign for exit 43 always looked a little crooked, like the bolts weren't tightened all the way, and anyone driving east on the highway outside Waco would see it flash by in the beams of their headlights. The reflective green had dulled with years of grime, but it still promised a way off the road, a place to stretch your legs, maybe grab a soda from a gas station before pushing on into the deeper dark. The GPS liked it too. If you punched in certain rural addresses out in Hill County, the polite synthetic voice would say, "Take exit 43 in 1 mile," as if it were any other stretch of concrete and painted lines. The problem was no one could ever find it again once they left. There were stories. Families on their way to campgrounds or visiting relatives in towns too small for most maps swore they had turned off, swore they had seen a gentle downward slope into a narrow ramp. Their headlights bounced across cracked asphalt, and the world seemed to hush as though someone had dropped a blanket over the road. Then nothing, just black. Sometimes the car showed up abandoned days later, still idling, hazard lights clicking steadily into silence. Other times, not even that much. The police report stacked up, thin folders with frustrated notes about possible wrong turn or mechanical failure. But if you drove that stretch of highway in the daylight, there was no exit 43, just an unbroken guardrail and fields that stretched flat and dry into the distance. One night, a family of 4 coming back from Dallas hit the ghost ramp. David, the father, was behind the wheel, his wife asleep in the passenger seat. The kids were quiet in the back, each with a screen glowing pale against their faces. The GPS told him to take exit 43. He saw the ramp as plain as anything, his headlights catching the white arrows stenciled on the pavement. He slowed, turned the wheel, and felt the tires hum against the change of surface. He glanced up into the rearview mirror to make sure his trailer was following smooth. but the reflection showed nothing behind them. Not even road, just a black pit that swallowed every hint of light. He blinked and looked forward again, and his stomach dropped. The ramp was gone. The guardrail was gone. The world was gone. Only the floating white dash of his headlights pushing forward into a thickness that looked less like fog and more like an absence of air itself. The kids began to cry. His wife woke up disoriented, asking where they were. David tried to turn around, but the wheel felt heavy in his hands. It spun, but the car didn't respond. The black pressed closer against the windows, and the sound inside the cabin grew muffled, like their ears were stuffed with cotton. He pressed the gas and the engine roared, but the sensation was like trying to run underwater. The car drifted forward an inch, maybe two, but the road beneath them had no texture, no feedback. Just an endless smooth nothing that felt like driving on glass. People who talk about the missing families say you can still hear them on certain nights. Truckers claim that if you pull over on that stretch and kill the engine, you'll catch faint honks. Little bursts of headlights flashing out of nowhere. Children's voices calling for their parents. One driver swore a minivan appeared in his lane, hazard lights stuttering like a heart monitor, then blinked out the instant he touched his brakes. Another said he saw a woman at the roadside waving him down, but when he rolled to a stop, she leaned close to his window and her face was blank skin. No mouth, no eyes, just the wet impression of hands slapping glass before she vanished. A teenager named Mason, who'd heard the legends his whole life, decided to test it. He took his friends out there one Friday after midnight. All of them crowded into his battered pickup, laughing too loud to keep their fear from showing. The GPS led them right to exit 43. They saw the ramp. It dipped neatly away from the highway, and Mason steered them onto it without hesitation. The laughter stopped. The black swallowed them whole, and their phones went dead all at once, screens cutting off mid-scroll like someone had pulled a plug. The only light left was the truck's high beams, which illuminated nothing but a narrow stretch of pale nothingness, as if the road had been painted onto a void. Panic rose quickly. One kid pounded the dash, another screamed for Mason to turn around, but when he tried, the wheel moved uselessly in his hands. The sound of the tires had gone silent. No crunch, no whine of rubber on surface. The void pressed closer as if it wanted in, as if it had been waiting. Mason jammed his foot down, and the truck surged into the black, the headlights stretching thin until they were just two pale threads pulled apart. One of the kids clawed at the door handle, flung it open, and jumped. He hit something that might have been ground, rolled, and then there was no more screaming. Just the slamming of the door as the suction of the nothing pulled it closed again. They were found a week later, or at least what was left of them. The truck had reappeared on the shoulder near the mile marker, idling with an empty tank, all four doors locked. The kids inside were gone except for Mason, who sat behind the wheel, skin gray, eyes open but blind. He couldn't talk, couldn't eat, just stared straight ahead, lips moving in a silent mumble like he was still listening to the GPS telling him to turn off. Locals tell each other to ignore the GPS when it mentions exit 43. Drive past. Don't even glance at the guardrail. They say if you look too long, the ramp will shimmer into being whether you want it or not, and the black will know you saw it. Truckers who take that highway won't stop within 5 miles of it, no matter how badly they need rest. Families lock their doors and whisper about the disappearances, but no one wants to talk too loud. Because sometimes at night when the road is quiet, you'll see the faint red glow of taillights out there, suspended in the dark, and if you follow them too far, you'll never come back. They say the ramp isn't a ramp at all. It's a mouth. Wide, patient, and always hungry. And every time the GPS tells you to take exit 43, it isn't the machine speaking. It's the thing below the highway, whispering directions to draw you home. The interstate at night feels like a different world, especially past midnight when the trucks thin out and the only lights are the red glow of taillights disappearing into darkness. East of Abilene, I-20 stretches flat and empty, the kind of road where the hum of tires becomes a lullaby you don't want but can't stop. That's why the rest stop just past mile marker 293 exists. A plain concrete slab with a few vending machines, some picnic tables under flickering fluorescent lights, and a bathroom that smells faintly of bleach no matter the hour. People call it the Dead Man's Rest Stop. The name doesn't come from any official sign, but from what locals whisper when the subject comes up. They say you don't want to be there at 3:15 a.m. because something waits then, Something tied to gasoline and iron and the heavy weight of sleep you can't shake once it takes you. I stopped there once and I swore I never would again. It was late August, thick with heat even at night, the kind where the asphalt sweats long after the sun goes down. I'd been driving since Dallas, trying to make it to Midland before morning. The white lines had started to blur, my head tilting forward more than once, each time jerking back in a panic. When I saw the green sign for the rest area, I felt relief stronger than thirst. Pulling in, I noticed only one other vehicle, a rust-red pickup with its hood popped open and nobody in sight. The lot had that hollow stillness of places abandoned in the wrong hour. I parked under a buzzing light, rolled the windows down for a hint of air, and told myself I'd close my eyes just for a few minutes. The smell hit me first. Not the dusty sweetness of hot pavement or the metallic tang of nearby oil fields, but sharp gasoline mixed with something sour, like rusted iron left out in rain. I thought maybe it drifted from the pickup, maybe a leak, but when I stepped out, the stink was everywhere, heavy as fog. The picnic tables looked wrong too, like they'd been shifted slightly, each one at an angle that didn't match the painted lines on the ground. The vending machines hummed, their lights cycling dim to bright as if they strained against a dying current. I felt a prickle under my shirt, the kind that tells you you're being watched though no one else was there. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion. I went back to the car and reclined the seat. Sleep didn't come gently. It dragged me under like water. I dreamed I was still on the highway, headlights sweeping blacktop. Only the road curved when it shouldn't, folding into itself, spiraling down. In the dream, my car engine sputtered, and then I smelled that gasoline stink again. When I opened my eyes, my dash clock glowed 3:14. The second hand ticked slower than it should have, like time was stretching thin. I sat up, heart hammering, and that's when I saw him. He stood near the picnic tables just outside the reach of the overhead light. A tall man in dark clothes, posture stiff as a pole, head tilted slightly like he listened to something only he could hear. His face was pale, too pale for the Texas night, his features blurred as though the light refused to hold him. In his right hand he carried a gas can, red plastic gleaming, and in the other something long and metal that scraped the concrete when he shifted. The smell of iron sharpened. I tried to start the car, but the key jammed in the ignition. My fingers shook. When I looked back, he was closer, standing in the yellow cone of light, and I saw his eyes. They weren't eyes at all, but black hollows sunk deep into his face, bottomless pits that caught no reflection. He raised the gas can slowly, tilted it, and I swore I heard the glug of liquid, though nothing spilled. The sound of dripping echoed in the lot, steady as a clock. Then my dash clicked over to 3:15 and the world went silent. No insects, no wind, not even the hum of the machines. The silence had weight, pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The man lowered the can and pointed the iron rod toward my car. I couldn't move. My body felt pinned, paralyzed, though my heart raced as if trying to break free of my ribs. He began walking forward, footsteps scraping slow across the concrete, each one stretching the silence tighter. When he reached the hood, the lights above flickered and went out. The lot plunged into darkness. I don't remember getting out of there. Only the sudden jolt of my tires hitting the rumble strip on I-20. The rest stopped shrinking in my rear view. My clock read 4:02, though it felt like only minutes had passed. Later, when I mentioned it at a truck diner near Sweetwater, an old driver shook his head. "You stopped at Deadman's," he said, like it explained everything. He told me back in the 70s a drifter set himself on fire there, doused in gasoline, iron bar still in his hand from breaking into vending machines. He burned so long the pavement bubbled. Since then, people who nap there don't wake on time. Alarms fail, clocks stall, and some don't wake at all. Troopers find them hours later, eyes wide open, hearts stopped as if something smothered them in their sleep. "The smell of gas lingers," he said, "because the man's can never emptied, not then, not now." I didn't want to believe him, but I can't deny what I saw. Sometimes on long nights I think about pulling in again, testing if it was real, if maybe I dreamed it on the edge of exhaustion. But then I smell phantom gasoline in my car, sharp and sour, and I keep driving no matter how heavy my eyes get. Because I know if I stop at 3:15 I might not wake again, and if I do it won't be in this world. Route 281 cuts through Texas like an old scar, a long stretch of asphalt lined with dead mesquite, tired gas stations, and faded towns that look half asleep even in daylight. At night it turns into something else entirely, a place where the dark presses in heavy and the headlights of your car become the only proof you're still moving forward. For years drivers have whispered about her, The woman in white who waits by the roadside, thumb out. Face pale and unreadable under the glow of the moon. They say she looks real as any stranded traveler. Until you let her in and feel nothing where she sits, the seat cushion untouched, the air cold enough to make your teeth chatter. Luis never believed any of it. He was 39, a trucker with 2 decades on the road, and he prided himself on being immune to ghost stories. He'd heard them all in the truck stops and greasy diners, tales told to pass the hours and scare rookies. The White Lady of 281 was just another myth, he figured. Another trick of the night and too much caffeine. He had no reason to doubt himself until the night in late September, when the air was thick with heat even at midnight, and he was hauling a load of parts out of San Antonio, planning to cut up 281 all the way north. The highway was dead quiet past Blanco. Not a car in sight, not even the distant red pinpricks of taillights ahead. The radio barely picked up static. Luis was rolling with his windows cracked to keep himself awake when he saw her. At first she was just a shape by the roadside, a pale outline against the black of the mesquite. As he got closer, the shape hardened into a woman, thin, standing barefoot on the gravel shoulder, her long dress catching in the warm wind. She didn't move, didn't even step forward, just turned her head slowly as his headlights swept across her face. It jolted him that she didn't look like a ghost. There was nothing see-through or glowing about her. She looked alive, too alive. Her skin was pale but textured, like porcelain that had seen sun once but not in years. Her hair was tangled and hung over her shoulders in long, dark strands. Her dress wasn't the spotless kind of white you see in campfire stories either. It was dirty, hem-stained brown as though she'd been walking for miles in the dust. The strangest part was her eyes. He caught them for just a moment before he passed, and they were blank. No reflection from his headlights, no life. Just flat, he kept going. He wasn't about to stop for some stranger in the middle of nowhere. His rig roared past, and the mirror showed her figure shrinking into the dark until the night swallowed her whole. He shook his head and muttered to himself about how people were crazy to be out walking this highway. 10 miles later, he forgot all about her, until she was there again. Same figure, same pale dress, same face turning slowly to meet his headlights. This time she stood by a mile marker, waiting, thumb lifted in the oldest signal in the world. Luis gripped the wheel tighter. His heart thumped heavy as he pressed his foot down harder. The engine rattled like a beast straining, but his eyes locked on her as the truck bore down, and once again, he passed her. The rearview mirror caught the same image, her figure shrinking into the distance, the white of her dress fading into the black until there was nothing. Luis muttered curses to himself, trying to reason it away. Maybe she'd been dropped off by some car taking a shortcut. Maybe she knew back roads he didn't. But the truth itched under his skin. No one could move that fast, not without a car. And he hadn't seen another soul on the road. He reached for his thermos and took a long swig of coffee, bitter and burned, forcing his focus back on the pavement ahead. 15 miles later, she was there again. Same place by the shoulder, thumb out, eyes dead. This time Luis felt the breath catch in his throat. He tried to look away but couldn't. Tried to ignore the shiver sliding down his spine, but it clung to him like sweat. He had the insane thought that if he didn't stop, if he kept ignoring her, she would keep showing up every few miles forever, until the road itself unraveled under his wheels. And so against everything his gut screamed, he slowed the rig and pulled over. His headlights washed her in harsh light as she stepped forward, moving with that same slow grace. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She just walked up to the passenger side and reached for the door handle. Luis unlocked it, though he swore he felt his hand move without his own command. The door creaked open and she climbed in, the dress whispering against the seat. She settled there, hands folded in her lap, head tilted slightly down like she was waiting. "Where are you headed?" Luis asked, his voice rough. He tried to act calm, to treat her like any hitchhiker. She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. The cab filled with a chill so sharp he could see his own breath bloom white in the dark. He glanced at the seat beside her and his stomach dropped. The cushion didn't dip. The fabric didn't wrinkle. The seatbelt strap hung untouched. She sat there but wasn't really there. Luis gripped the wheel and pulled back onto the road, his chest tight, his eyes flicking between her and the endless stretch of blacktop. He tried again. "You all right, miss? You need to get somewhere?" Still nothing. She stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, lips pale and still. The longer he drove, the colder the cab became, until his knuckles were stiff on the wheel. At some point, he noticed the radio had gone silent. Not static, not faint music, just silence like the thing had died. The hum of the engine was all that remained, and even that sounded muffled, as though the world outside had been shut out. Louis swallowed hard, fighting the urge to slam the brakes and throw her out. But some instinct told him not to, that opening the door again might let in something worse than cold air. The miles dragged on. She didn't move, didn't blink. Once or twice Louis thought he saw her head turn slightly, like she was looking at him out of the corner of her eye, but whenever he glanced fully, her face was fixed forward. His heart hammered until he could hear it in his ears. Sweat dripped down his back despite the freezing air. He thought about pulling into the next gas station, but when he finally saw one, its neon lights flickering against the dark, something twisted in his gut told him it wouldn't be there when he stopped. It was after an hour that she finally moved. Her head turned slowly, and for the first time she looked at him. Her eyes weren't blank anymore. They were deep black pits, wide and endless, like staring down a well at midnight. Her lips parted and a sound came out, but it wasn't a voice. It was a low hiss, like the leaking of gas under pressure, rising until it filled the cab. Louis cried out, slamming the brakes, the truck lurching as the tires screamed against asphalt. The hiss cut off. The cab was empty. The seat beside him was untouched, cold as ice. The door was shut tight. He sat there trembling, sweat soaking his shirt, his breath ragged in the frozen air. Slowly, he shifted the truck back into gear, eyes wide on the black road stretching ahead. He didn't look in the mirrors. He didn't dare. They say Luis made it to his destination, but he was never the same. Fellow drivers swore he quit the road a month later, sold his rig, and moved in with family, saying nothing about what happened. Some claimed he drank himself into silence. Others that he refused to drive any road after dark. But every now and then, someone else on 281 reports her. The woman in white, thumb out, face pale, eyes dead. Some say they keep driving and she fades away. Others say they let her in. And if you ask them what happens then, they just shake their heads and look at the ground as if words could never explain the cold that lingers long after she's gone. The two-lane backroads of East Texas have a way of swallowing people whole. They run flat for miles, twisting through pines and low swampy stretches where the mist sits thick even in summer, and every stretch looks like the last. Out there, it isn't hard to feel like the world has forgotten you. That's when the black pickup shows up. It never starts where you notice it. You'll be driving along, radio humming low, maybe headlights carving tunnels through fog, and all at once the truck is behind you. Old Chevy, late 70s, paint dulled to the color of oil, grill bent like it's rammed one too many fences. It rides your tail so close you swear you can feel its heat pressing against your bumper. Sometimes you catch a shape in the driver's seat, just a silhouette, shoulders too wide, head too still. Most times it looks empty, as though the wheel is turning itself. People say if you pull aside, let it pass. It never does. It waits, revs, floods your mirrors with light that shouldn't even be possible from those cloudy lamps. Then it vanishes. Not by turning, not by slowing, just gone when you blink, as though the road swallowed it whole. A man named Mark Tucker swore he saw it one September night heading back from a job in Lufkin. He worked long shifts patching power lines and knew those roads as well as anyone. The truck pulled behind him somewhere around Apple Springs, riding him hard through the pine corridors. He sped up to 70, 80, still it stayed glued to him. He said when he looked back, the cab wasn't dark. It glowed faintly, like someone had a lantern swinging inside, throwing shadows against the windshield. He floored it until the speedometer quivered near 90. His truck rattled, old engine screaming, and when he risked another glance, the Chevy wasn't there. Just blacktop and fog trailing off into nothing. Mark pulled over, shaking, and stayed there until dawn. He never drove those roads again. There's another story about a college kid from Nacogdoches. She'd been out with friends at Lake Sam Rayburn, headed home well past midnight. Her little Corolla struggled on those back roads, engine whining every time the pavement dipped. She said the pickup came out of nowhere, close enough she thought it would push her clear off the road. She rolled her window down, waved frantically for it to back off, but the driver didn't move. Then she noticed something strange. Her dash clock had frozen, midnight blinking. No matter how long she drove, it never changed. She swore she heard something over her music too, a low engine growl inside her own car, rattling the speakers even when she turned them off. When she finally reached the lights of town, the truck was gone. But her dash clock never worked again. Locals whisper it isn't a real truck, not anymore. They say it was a rancher back in the 70s, A mean drunk who ran people off the road for sport. One night he picked the wrong kid, a boy who wasn't afraid. That boy slammed his brakes, forced the Chevy into a pine, and it burned. Folks said the fire lit the treetops and no body was ever found. Only melted steel, twisted chrome, and boot prints in the ash leading away from the wreck. But some don't buy the campfire tale. Truckers say they've seen it way out west near San Angelo, or down south by the border roads. Same Chevy, same dead lights flaring bright enough to blind, same vanish into nothing. The land's too big, they figure, for one ghost to haunt. Maybe there are many, or maybe the road itself breeds things after dark. I only know what I saw. One night near DeBoll, my wife and I were driving home from a cousin's place. 2 a.m., empty stretch, moon high but hidden by clouds. I'd heard the stories, brushed them off like you do. Then the mirrors lit up white. That truck was so close I couldn't see its hood, just light searing the glass. My wife shouted, told me to pull over, but something in me froze. It felt like if I stopped, it would climb right into us. So I drove faster than I should have on those winding roads. The strange part wasn't the lights or the way it kept pace. It was the silence. Our tires, our engine, even my wife's panicked voice felt muffled, like cotton stuffed in my ears. I knew if I looked long enough into that glow, I'd never look back. When I finally dared glance again, it was gone. My hands hurt from clenching the wheel. My wife wouldn't talk for the rest of the night. When we pulled into our drive, the taillights lit up the garage door like normal. But in the middle of that red glow, faint and flickering, was another set of lights, smaller, square, the kind you'd see on an old Chevy. They blinked once and went out. Sometimes, when I drive late, I still catch the echo of a motor in the wind. Not mine, not anyone else's, just waiting. Out here you learn quick that the blacktop doesn't belong to you after dark. It belongs to the one still chasing, and the Chevy never really turns. It only disappears long enough to find someone else. On long, empty stretches of Texas highway, it isn't unusual to drive for hours without seeing a town. Just scrubland, mesquite, the occasional abandoned gas station with sun-faded signs, and the low growl of 18-wheelers rolling in the opposite lane. That was the way it always had been, and if you knew the roads, you could almost predict every curve, every lonely exit, every faded billboard. That's why the first time the sign appeared, it didn't sit right with Jason McAllister. He knew that road, had driven it more times than he could count. Between Abilene and Sweetwater, there was nothing but two-lane blacktop and a long horizon. But there it was, rising from the shoulder as if it had always been there. A green reflective sign with blocky white letters spelling out, "Welcome to Nowhere." Below the words was a glowing arrow, pulsing faintly as if lit from within, pointing down a narrow county road that cut away into the dark. Jason slowed his truck, one hand tightening on the wheel. The sign wasn't official. He knew the typeface, the way the state marked exits and town limits, and this wasn't it. The glow wasn't headlights catching paint. It looked alive, like the letters themselves radiated a sickly light. He passed it without turning, shaking his head, muttering that he must have been more tired than he thought. But even in his rear view, the sign shone clear as day, and for a second he thought he saw something moving at its base, like someone standing there, watching him go. By the time he reached Sweetwater, he had convinced himself it was a prank. Some local kids must have rigged up a light and a homemade sign, trying to spook drivers. He told a buddy about it at the diner, but his buddy just frowned and said, "There's no road between Abilene and here. Just dirt tracks, nothing worth putting a sign on." Jason laughed it off, but when he drove home the next night, the sign was there again. Same glow, same arrow. Only this time, something was different. Under the words was a population count that hadn't been there before. It read POP. 1. Jason didn't turn then either, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to look. He pressed the accelerator harder, driving as though speed itself might shake loose the chill crawling his skin. When he looked back in the mirror, the numbers were changing. POP 2, POP 3, as if the sign were counting. Sleep didn't come easy after that. He dreamed of driving roads that went nowhere, of signs that whispered to him, of figures standing by the shoulder of the road, their faces smeared into blank white shapes. He woke sweating, sheets damp. The glow of that sign burned into the back of his eyes. The third night, he swore he wouldn't look. He told himself he'd keep his eyes straight ahead, drive past like it wasn't even there. But when his headlights caught the green surface, his head turned of its own accord. The sign was brighter now, humming faintly. Pop. 37. The arrow pulsed with each beat of his heart. And he thought, just for a second, he saw lights down the county road, faint yellow glimmers like street lamps in the distance. But he knew no such town existed. By the fourth night, Jason wasn't himself anymore. His co-worker said he was pale, distracted, muttering under his breath. He quit answering his phone. His truck smelled of sweat and gasoline, the cab littered with empty coffee cups. Something about that sign had hooked into him, dug deep. He wanted to turn. He needed to turn. Every mile on the highway felt longer, every minute heavier, until he was sure that if he didn't find out what lay down that road, he'd lose his mind. So when he saw it again, brighter than ever, population, number racing past triple digits, he flicked on his blinker and took the turn. The road was narrower than he expected, more like a farm track than a county road. His headlights swept over fences, rusted wire, and skeletal oaks reaching into the night. The asphalt was cracked, weeds poking through, but still his tires rolled smooth as if guided. After a mile, the glow began. Faint at first, then stronger until the horizon lit with an amber haze. It was unmistakable. Streetlights. A town. And as he crested a rise, there it was spread before him like something out of an old postcard. A main street lined with brick buildings. A courthouse with a clock tower, hands frozen at midnight. A diner with neon flickering. Houses with porches and picket fences, all of it glowing with a warm golden light. But no sound, no movement, no cars, no people, just light. Jason parked on the edge of the town square, engine rumbling too loud in the silence. He stepped out, boots crunching on pavement, and the air hit him. It smelled of dust, old paper, and something sweet rotting beneath it. Every storefront was lit, windows shining, yet when he pressed his face to the glass, he saw only emptiness. No tables, no shelves, no furniture, just bare rooms glowing with light that came from nowhere. He walked further, calling out once, twice. His voice didn't echo. It felt swallowed, as though the town itself absorbed sound. When he reached the diner, the door swung open without touch. Inside, the booths were neatly arranged, menus on tables, coffee steaming in cups that no one had poured. He reached for one and the cup was warm in his hand, the coffee real, the smell bitter. He put it down fast, heart pounding. Then he heard it, faint at first, then rising. Footsteps, not behind him, not ahead, but everywhere at once. The sound of shoes on pavement, boots on wood, heels on tile. A town full of people moving, though he could see no one. Windows flickered as though figures passed by them. Shadows stretched across walls where nothing stood. The courthouse bell tolled once, slow and heavy, and the clock hands trembled, still stuck at midnight. The population sign flashed in his mind the way it had ticked upward. He wondered what number it read now. Jason ran. He sprinted back to his truck, fumbling keys, breath tearing his throat raw. When the engine roared to life, relief surged through him, but only for a second, because in his mirrors lining the sidewalks, filling the porches, standing shoulder to shoulder along the street, they were there, hundreds of them. People without faces, just pale ovals of skin where eyes and mouths should have been. There, heads turned toward him in unison, and though they had no eyes, he felt their stare burning through glass and steel and bone. One of them raised a hand, a slow gesture, and the whole crowd followed. They pointed at him, arms lifting in the same terrible rhythm. He tore down the road, headlights bouncing, gravel spitting. The glow faded behind him, the highway rushing up ahead. His hands shook on the wheel, but when he glanced in the mirror, the town was gone. Nothing but black fields, nothing but empty road. He didn't slow until Sweetwater, and even then he couldn't stop shaking. The next night, drivers reported seeing him. His truck parked on the shoulder near the glowing sign. Jason himself stood beside it, waving, smiling too wide, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Some say if you pass him by, the sign flashes brighter, the population number clicks up by 1, and the arrow pulses harder. Others whisper that if you follow, you'll see Jason among the faceless crowd, his features scrubbed away, pointing at the next unlucky traveler. No map shows the town. No GPS will guide you there. But on lonely Texas highways, the sign waits, humming in the night, glowing green and white, promising a place that doesn't exist. Welcome to nowhere, population, always one more. The key was heavier than it should have been, a solid brass thing that gleamed faintly in the fluorescent light of the front desk. The motel clerk, a thin man with tired eyes and a receding hairline, slid it across the counter to me without ceremony. "Room 6, he said in a voice so flat it sounded like it had been pressed between 2 sheets of paper. I glanced past him through the wide front window where the neon sign buzzed and flickered against the Texas night. Vacancy. Always vacancy. The place looked like it hadn't been full since the 70s. I took the key and made my way along the walkway that ran in front of the rooms. The place had 5 doors evenly spaced, paint peeling off the numbers stenciled onto them. 1 through 5. I stopped and frowned. The brass key in my hand had a worn, almost oily tag attached to it, stamped with the number 6. I walked the length twice, squinting into the shadows where the fluorescent tubes failed to reach. 5 doors, only 5. I stood there for a long moment, the cicadas screaming in the trees beyond the cracked parking lot, the smell of hot asphalt and dust hanging in the air. Then I laughed softly to myself, the kind of laugh you make when you're not really amused. Maybe 6 was on the far side, tucked around the corner. Some motels had L-shaped wings. That had to be it. But when I went around the corner, there was nothing. Just the back of the building, a sagging chain-link fence and the black silhouettes of mesquite trees. No 6th door. No 6th room. I stood in the darkness with the crickets and the faint hum of the highway beyond the trees, staring at the key in my palm. The brass was cold despite the thick humidity of the night. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, that instinctive itch you get when you're suddenly aware you might not be alone. I told myself it didn't matter. I could take any room. Keys, locks, doors, who cared? I walked back to the first row, picked number 3 at random, and slid the key in. It turned smoothly. The door opened without resistance, as if the lock had been made for it. I stepped inside and shut it behind me. The room smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic and sour. The lamp on the nightstand lit up when I clicked it on, casting a weak yellow glow over the bed, the sagging armchair, the floral curtains that looked like they hadn't been washed in a decade. Standard cheap motel stuff, but the atmosphere was wrong, thick like damp wool against my skin. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down. The springs whined beneath me. I set the key on the table. It gleamed in the dim light, as though it were pleased with itself. Later, I noticed the sound. A faint scratching. At first, I thought it was just tree branches outside, but the room's only window faced the parking lot. The scratching grew louder. It seemed to come from the wall just behind the headboard. Long, deliberate strokes, like fingernails dragging across drywall. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I stepped back, heart thumping, telling myself it was mice, maybe a raccoon in the crawl space. But when I turned, I saw the key had moved. It was no longer on the table. It lay on the floor closer to the bathroom door as if it had been nudged. I froze, staring at it. My throat felt dry, my palms damp. The room was silent again. I forced myself to bend, pick up the key, and set it back on the table. The brass was colder than before. Sleep didn't come easy. I left the light on, lay back with the blanket pulled to my chin, and watched shadows twitch across the ceiling. Sometime after midnight, I woke with a jolt. The lamp had gone out. The room was pitch black. I reached for the switch, but before my fingers found it, I heard the click of a lock turning. Not mine, another, somewhere in the row outside. A door opening. Then another. I held my breath. Through the thin walls, I heard footsteps on the walkway. Slow dragging steps, deliberate. I pulled myself upright, heart banging against my ribs. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I stared at the faint outline of it, barely visible in the darkness. A pause, then a sound, metal sliding into a keyhole. My key, my lock. But it was already locked from the inside. I whispered to myself, "That's impossible." The knob rattled gently, then stilled. Silence pressed in, heavy and smothering. When I finally flicked the lamp back on, the room was empty, door still bolted, but the key was gone. I searched frantically under the bed, behind the chair, in my bag. Gone. I didn't sleep again. At first light, I packed and stepped outside. The row of doors gleamed faintly in the weak morning sun. 1 through 5. But as I turned back to leave, I stopped dead. There was a 6th. Between 4 and 5, where a blank stretch of wall had been, stood a door with the number 6 on it. The paint was fresh, the brass numbers gleaming. My stomach lurched. I stumbled toward it, hand trembling as I reached for the knob. It was locked, of course, but there was something smeared along the frame. Dark. Dried. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I staggered to the front office. The clerk looked up from his newspaper. Same tired eyes, same flat voice. "Checking out already?" he asked. I slammed my hand on the counter. "That key," I said. "Room 6. What the hell is in there?" He blinked slowly like a reptile. Then he smiled, thin and joyless. "You used it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. His smile grew wider. "Some folks do. Some folks always will. Room 6 doesn't exist until someone believes it does. Once you open it, you can't close it." He slid open a drawer, pulled out a brass key on a worn tag, the number 6 stamped deep into it. He set it on the counter between us. My hand shook as I backed away. "No," I whispered. "That's not mine." I gave it back. His eyes flicked to my pocket. I reached down. Cold metal brushed my fingertips. The key was there, heavy as stone. I dropped it on the counter and turned to leave, but when I reached the parking lot, my car was gone. Every vehicle was gone, just an empty stretch of cracked asphalt under the punishing Texas sun. I looked back at the motel. 6 doors standing neat in a row, the 6th one darker than the rest. The clerk stood in the window watching me, his face pale and distant like something pressed behind glass. I turned to run, but the heat rippled the air, blurring the world around me, and no matter which way I moved, the row of doors stretched longer, reaching into the horizon. Each door bore the number 6. Each key weighed down my pocket until I thought it would tear through my skin. And behind every one of those doors, something waited for me to open it. Something scratching, patient, hungry. The highway outside Abilene stretched wide and empty, the kind of asphalt that seemed to breathe when the night was hot enough. Jack's old Chevy pickup rattled along the blacktop with the windows cracked, and the only thing filling the silence was the low hum of the radio. He had driven that route 100 times before, back and forth from long hauls, but tonight felt different. The sky was moonless, a thick cover of clouds pressing down on the land, and the only light came from his headlights glancing off the broken reflectors that lined the shoulder. He tapped the knob on the radio just to have something in his ears, and it caught a station he didn't remember ever tuning to. The song that came through was country, twangy and soaked in static like it was playing from a jukebox buried 10 feet underground. He leaned in, trying to catch the words because they seemed wrong. They weren't like any song he knew, but something about the tune carried a familiarity that tugged at the back of his head. The lyrics were stretched thin, almost mumbled, but the longer he listened, the clearer they became. And then just before the chorus, he heard his name, whispered, plain as day. Jack. At first he laughed under his breath, telling himself it was the static, a coincidence, some DJ's trick bleeding across the waves. He turned the knob, scanning for another station, but the radio fought him, hissing and crackling before snapping right back to the same tune. The singer's voice was deep, like gravel dragged across wood, and the words carried no rhythm now, just a steady calling out of his name in between lines of broken melody. Jack. Don't you stop. Jack. Keep driving. His knuckles tightened around the wheel, but he told himself to keep calm, to ignore it. Out here, the airwaves could be strange. Military signals, truckers' chatter, even old tapes running on loop from stations that shut down decades ago. That had to be it. He pressed harder on the gas, rolling faster through the Texas dark, the prairie fields stretching forever on both sides, the power lines crooked against the horizon. But when he turned his head just enough to glance into the rear view, he thought he saw the faint glow of taillights following him. There was no engine hum, no headlights burning into his mirror, just the weak reddish shine like lanterns swaying far down the road, keeping pace. The radio voice shifted. The song cut back into verses, words about dust, about long nights and lost souls, all of it muddied and wet with distortion. But threaded through every line was his name, stretched out now like someone dragging their breath into his ear. He slammed the knob off, silencing the cab, but the air didn't feel any less full. The whisper still pressed at him, like it had crawled out of the speakers and burrowed straight into the metal of the truck. He slapped the dashboard, muttered curses under his breath, and rolled the window up as though shutting himself in might help. That was when the faintest sound seeped through the closed glass, riding on the wind, as if the very night had picked up the chorus. The same tune, the same dragged-out name, Jack. His throat was dry, his chest heavy, and his hands shook against the wheel. He told himself to pull over, to get his bearings, but the thought of stopping out here with that sound still curling in the dark made his skin crawl. The glow in the mirror was closer now, 2 steady lights bobbing and weaving across the blacktop. Though still no headlights hit him, no car engine rose behind. He gritted his teeth and sped up. 90, 95. The tires hummed and rattled as the pavement blurred beneath him, and still the glow behind never faltered. Worse, the faint tune pressed harder, clearer now, like the radio had never been shut off. He could make out every word, each verse, about endless roads, about death riding the passenger seat, and about never making it home again. Each chorus whispered his name softer than the last, like the singer was closer, like he was leaning in from the back seat. Jack risked a glance over his shoulder. For just a second, the cab's rear bench wasn't empty. A man sat there, face obscured by shadow, shoulders wide, head bowed low as he mouthed the words that slid into Jack's ears. When Jack jerked his head back forward, the rear view was empty again, only the faint glow trailing him down the highway. His breath came ragged, sweat beading on his temples despite the cool night air hissing from the vents. He thought of swinging off the highway, turning into some gas station lot, any town's lit street, but every sign he passed was for places he didn't know. Names of exits he swore weren't there last week, towns that had no right being carved on the green boards that flashed past, and always behind him the glow, always in his ears that dragging voice. The pavement stretched forever, no end, no turnoff that felt real enough to trust. The dashboard clock blinked 12:47, then 12:52, then 1:03, but the road never changed. He thought about killing the engine, just slamming the brakes and letting whatever was behind him catch up. But the thought froze him solid. Some instinct deeper than fear told him that if he stopped, the song would stop too, and then the silence would be worse. Because it wouldn't really be silence. It would be the singer right there waiting to finish what he started. By the time the first pale line of dawn touched the horizon, the radio finally died into a hiss of static and went cold. The glow behind him flickered once and was gone. Jack eased the truck onto the shoulder, chest heaving, eyes burning with sleeplessness. He killed the engine, leaned back in the seat, and listened to the silence. For a long while he thought he was safe, until the wind shifted through the cracked vent again. The faintest trace of the tune rose in the air, almost too soft to catch. A verse about the end of the road. A whisper of his name, Jack. And this time it wasn't on the radio. It was coming from the back seat. The bridge on the edge of Laredo was never much to look at even before it collapsed. A stretch of weather-beaten concrete laid across scrubland and mesquite trees, the kind of place that didn't make it into postcards or history books. It had burned in a freak accident 15 years back when a semi jackknifed, ruptured its tank and spilled fire over the girders. Since then, the road above was closed, fenced off, and officially forgotten. Locals avoided it, but truckers on the back highways knew it as a landmark. A warning in the dark when you cut off the interstate and trusted your rig to the narrow veins of Texas. The thing about Laredo was that its outskirts were stitched with shadow, old farms, forgotten homesteads, and miles of thorn brush and cactus that seemed to absorb sound. Out there, the night didn't feel like an empty sky. It felt like a lid pressed down. Miguel knew the bridge better than most. He'd grown up in Laredo, left for Dallas, then drifted back when work dried up. He worked nights for a delivery company, running runs nobody else wanted, and every route took him near the burnt crossing. He didn't believe in ghost stories, not really, though he'd heard them all. His cousin swore he'd seen faces when headlights swept under the broken arch, half charred like masks caught in the beam, and then gone when you looked straight at them. Teenagers dared each other to stop there, honk, and wait. Supposedly, if you did, something would knock on your window. Miguel laughed at that, the same way he laughed at the whispered claims that the burned bridge was cursed ground. But he noticed he drove a little faster when his tires rumbled over the dirt shoulder. and the black skeleton of the bridge appeared ahead. On that October night, the air was dry and restless. Dust rose off the shoulders in sheets and the moon was hiding behind clouds. He was hauling parts out to a contractor's yard past Cotulla, and the only sound in his cab was the hum of the radio and the occasional rattle of loose cargo. The old bridge came into sight like a scar on the earth, two crumbling concrete arms that no longer met in the middle. Beneath it, the brush pressed thick and dark, and what remained of the highway slumped down into shadow. He slowed without realizing it. The stories whispered back to him, the kind that sounded silly in daylight but grew sharp in the hollow night. He told himself he didn't care. Still, as his headlights washed across the collapse, he saw them, faces just like his cousin had described. Darkened, blistered shapes that caught the light and hung there for a moment too long. Their mouths moved as if whispering, though his windows were sealed. He jerked the wheel slightly and cursed himself under his breath. Miguel didn't stop. He drove past, heart thudding harder than it should, and told himself it was just burned concrete, the way shadows played on rough edges. But the radio died at that moment, cutting from a Tejano ballad to silence. He twisted the dial, checked the wires, but nothing came back. Only the sound of his own breath and the rumble of tires on uneven road. It stayed dead until he was clear of the bridge, and then the static returned, followed by music as if nothing had happened. He tried not to think about it, but the thought followed him into the desert. What if the burned bridge didn't want to be forgotten? The next night he told himself he wouldn't see anything. He ran the same route, and sure enough, the road brought him back. The air smelled faintly of gasoline, though he couldn't explain why. He slowed again against his better judgment. The headlights swept, and this time the faces weren't still. They turned. He swore they turned as one, eyeless sockets locking on his cab. He pressed the gas, but the truck felt sluggish, the air in the cab heavy. For a moment the world compressed like the desert itself leaned in. Then the truck roared forward, the bridge shrinking in the mirror. His palms were wet on the wheel. By the third run he should have rerouted, but stubbornness and habit kept him on the road. Each time the faces grew clearer, less like stone, more like something burned and trapped mid-scream. He thought of the trucker whose rig had started the fire years back. The papers said he died instantly, but nobody ever found the others. Rumors claimed migrants had been packed into the trailer, hidden, left to roast alive when the fire spread. Nobody admitted it, but everyone in town knew. And if it was true, then the bridge wasn't just a wreck. It was a tomb. The fourth night he promised himself he'd drive fast. No looking, no slowing. He cranked the radio to drown out the silence and fixed his eyes dead ahead. As he approached, the beam of his headlights licked across the underside of the bridge. The burned faces weren't waiting this time. Instead, they stood on the shoulder of the road. Dozens of them lining the dirt, blistered figures whose skin shone like candle wax. Their mouths opened together in a scream he couldn't hear but felt in his chest. The truck shuddered as if the air itself had weight. Miguel floored it. They didn't move, didn't chase, but his rear view showed them watching until the road curved away. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? But he stopped sleeping, right? Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of fire, of smoke filling his lungs, the sound of fists pounding inside a metal trailer door. One night he woke to the smell of burning in his bedroom, but the house was intact. Another night he dreamed of driving under the bridge and stalling there, faces pressing against the windows until the glass cracked. His work suffered. He told his supervisor he needed a different route, but the man just shrugged and said they were short-handed. The last run came at the end of the month. The wind carried ash, though nothing nearby was burning. Miguel gripped the wheel, sweating in the cool night, and told himself he'd take it slow this time. Face it head on. When he reached the bridge, the radio cut again, dead as a snapped wire. The headlights swept, and this time the figures weren't waiting in shadows or on the shoulder. They were on the bridge itself, in the collapsed gap, crawling over the blackened concrete like insects. Their faces caught the beam, burned and grinning, eyes hollow. He braked hard without meaning to, the truck skidding on gravel. For a moment the world froze. The faces turned upward, their mouths opening wide. He could hear them now, a dry whisper like air escaping a furnace. Stay. When the engine died, he tried to restart, but the key only clicked. Shapes gathered at the edge of the road, burned hands reaching. The smell of gasoline flooded the cab. He shut his eyes, pressed his forehead to the wheel, and prayed like he hadn't prayed in years. When he dared to look up again, the road was empty. The engine roared to life without his touch. The radio came back with static, then silence. He drove until dawn, shaking so hard he could barely keep the truck straight. Miguel never drove that route again. He quit the job within a week and left Laredo behind, telling himself the border town could rot without him. But sometimes, years later, when he crossed a bridge at night and headlights swept concrete, he saw them, the burned faces waiting in the shadows, whispering from the dark. And each time he did, he remembered what the bridge had told him, in a voice that still scratched inside his skull when he tried to sleep. Stay. The two-lane stretch of Highway 77 between Giddings and LaGrange always had a way of swallowing the horizon. You could drive for miles and see nothing but bluebonnets in the spring, their petals rising like tiny blue flames against the green fields. At sunset they seemed endless, so thick that the land appeared carpeted in them, as though the highway had cut a scar through a painting. Travis Morgan had driven that road 100 times hauling supplies for his contracting work. But that night, his old Chevy Silverado decided to cough its last breath right in the middle of that sea of flowers. The engine sputtered, backfired once, and died with a low groan that made the dash lights dim. He coasted onto the narrow shoulder, the fields of bluebonnets whispering in the evening wind, their fragrance almost too strong when the truck's fan stopped pushing air. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just a hollow click like something deep inside the bones of the truck had broken. Travis muttered a curse under his breath and rested his forehead on the steering wheel. It was a long way back to Giddings, longer still to LaGrange, and the light was draining fast. His phone showed 2 bars of service, barely enough to load the map, but not enough to call for a tow. He told himself he'd wait. Someone always came along Highway 77, though sometimes hours passed between headlights. He rolled the window down and listened to the wind moving through the flowers. It was soft, like cloth dragged across wood, but it carried something else beneath it, a rhythm he didn't like, almost like a breath. He froze, hand hovering over the ignition even though he knew it was useless. The sound wasn't coming from the truck. It was coming from the field, deep in the bluebonnets, low and steady like lungs drawing in air that didn't belong to them. He shook his head hard, rubbed his eyes, and told himself it was just the breeze sweeping through 1,000 stems. But when he listened harder, he could pick out pauses, slow exhalations, the faint rasp of something too close to human. He locked the truck out of instinct and leaned back in his seat, telling himself he'd laugh about this later. Dusk thickened. The sky dimmed from gold to violet, and with it the bluebonnets seemed to rise taller, their shadows stretching until they looked like a crowd standing in the field, shoulders hunched, heads bowed. His stomach turned when he thought he saw one of the shadows move, not with the wind but against it. Travis dug the flashlight from his glove box and shone it across the flowers. The beam caught 1,000 petals swaying, silver blue under the light, but nothing stood upright. Nothing moved. He shut it off quickly, realizing how much the light had exposed him in the cab. His reflection in the glass looked pale, his eyes wide, sweat clinging to his temples though the air outside was cooling fast. A soft thump rattled the truck bed. He whipped around, nearly breaking his neck, but there was nothing behind him but flowers rippling. The metal of the Silverado pinged again like something had brushed it. He hit the locks again, even though they were already set, and gripped the flashlight in one hand like a weapon. The smell hit next. Sweet at first, like crushed flowers, but under it lay something coppery and raw. The scent of blood carried on the wind, faint but sharp enough to crawl into his nose and throat. He gagged and covered his face with his shirt collar, eyes watering. A shadow lifted itself above the bluebonnets about 20 feet away. For a moment, Travis thought it was just a trick of the twilight, some lone bush standing taller than the rest. Then it shifted forward, pushing stems aside without bending them, gliding through the field as if it breathed with every movement. The sound came clearer now, long inhalations, ragged exhales, almost wet. Travis started the truck again out of desperation. The engine coughed, screamed once, and died. He pounded the steering wheel, his heart hammering loud enough to drown the breathing. The thing was closer now. He could see its outline, shoulders narrow but rising higher than any man's, head elongated like something straining to lift above the flowers. Its face remained hidden, but its chest swelled in unnatural rhythm, dragging in air too greedily. He made the mistake of shining the flashlight again. The beam cut across a patch of bluebonnets, and for the briefest second he saw faces beneath the petals. Not one, not two, but dozens, their skin blistered and cracked, eyes shut tight, mouths slack as though sleeping. Their features melted into the flowers, petals growing from burned flesh, blue and violet sprouting from where hair should have been. He dropped the flashlight and it rolled under the seat, beam pointing at his boots. The breathing reached the truck now. It fogged the glass, though nothing touched it. The windows clouded with condensation, each circle expanding like a chest rising against the pane. Travis grabbed the door handle but stopped. Stepping outside meant stepping into that field, into those endless flowers that now looked more like a graveyard than a meadow. A low groan came from beneath the truck, the frame shuddering as if something heavy had hooked itself underneath. The whole cab rocked once, twice, then stilled. Travis clenched his teeth until his jaw hurt, staring at the condensation as words began to form in it, written by invisible breath. Leave. The letters stretched across the passenger window, dripping in lines of fog. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His only thought was to obey. He shoved the door open and stumbled out, sprinting down the shoulder of Highway 77. His boots crushed the edge of the flowers, and as they broke beneath him, he swore he heard sighs. Hundreds of tiny exhalations rising from every crushed stem. He didn't look back. The truck shrank behind him, swallowed by twilight. The sound of breathing followed him all the way down the road until the darkness of the fields was complete, and the only thing he heard was his own ragged gasp, matching the rhythm he'd fled. Travis never found the truck again. When he returned days later with the tow, there was no sign it had broken down, no tracks in the dirt, no indentation where its tires had rested. Only blue bonnets thick as ever, swaying in a wind that sounded too much like lungs. The gas pumps at Rest Stop 27 had long since been boarded up, their metal husks rusting under years of Texas sun. Truckers still pulled off the I-35 there, some out of habit, others because the stretch between Waco and Temple had too few safe places to rest. The vending machines worked on and off, half-stocked with stale candy and sodas, but the bathrooms were always open, always humming with that low fluorescent buzz. That night, near midnight, a man named Clay parked his Dodge at the far edge of the lot, his eyelids heavy, his bladder fuller than he liked to admit. He figured a quick bathroom stop would be safer than falling asleep at the wheel. The place looked deserted, the parking lot washed in sodium light, cicadas droning in the black fields beyond the guardrail. He shoved the door shut and walked stiff-legged toward the building, gravel crunching under his boots. Inside, the men's room smelled faintly of bleach mixed with something metallic. One urinal was taped off, a yellow streak staining its porcelain. Clay washed his hands after, glancing up into the mirror above the sinks. The glass was cracked down the middle, jagged like a lightning bolt frozen in time, but it still held a clear enough reflection. He hated how the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, making him look sickly pale, shadows under his eyes deep as bruises. He leaned forward, gripping the sink, then noticed something off. His reflection wasn't moving with him. He blinked, leaning closer. He lifted his hand and waved, and for a split second the mirrored version of him stayed still. Head tilted, mouth slightly open, then followed with a lag that made his stomach clench. He muttered a curse, blaming fatigue. He splashed water on his face, rubbed his eyes, then looked again. The reflection smiled. His lips had not moved. Clay stumbled back, heart hammering, and shook his head. He told himself it was a trick of the crack, the way it distorted angles like a funhouse mirror. But when he turned toward the door, he caught the reflection still facing him, even though his back was to the sink. His throat went dry. Without flushing, without another glance, he shoved through the bathroom door and stepped into the cool night air. The parking lot looked emptier than before. His truck sat where he left it, but he thought the shadows stretched further than they should have, as if the poles holding the lamps had grown taller. He quickened his pace, boots striking louder than they should against the concrete. He tried not to look back, but something pressed on the back of his neck, that crawling sensation of being watched. When he gave in and turned, the glass door reflected the bathroom interior, but through that jagged mirror line he saw himself still standing inside, both hands gripping the sink, staring directly at him. Clay froze. He felt his body outside, his chest rising and falling, the night wind against his arms, but the version of him inside never moved, never blinked. The lights in the bathroom flickered, then steadied, and the reflection smiled again. Wide, too wide. His knees locked. He forced himself to move, breaking into a jog toward his truck, fumbling for the keys. By the time he yanked the door open, sweat slicked his palms. He shoved the key in, twisted, and the engine roared. Relief flooded him until he glanced at the rear view. In the mirror above his dash, lit by the faint glow of the bathroom behind him, he saw himself walking calmly out of the restroom, closing the door and heading in his direction. The Clay in the mirror wasn't rushing, wasn't frantic. He moved slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The cracked grin never faltered. Clay gripped the wheel and slammed the accelerator, tires squealing against the concrete, his truck lurching forward into the dark. He drove until the rest stop was a pinprick in the mirror, but when he checked again, he still saw the other him, not falling behind, not fading. The cracked reflection sat calmly in the passenger seat now, its head tilted, smile frozen, eyes unblinking, watching every turn of the wheel. And when Clay dared to look away from the road and glance at the actual passenger seat, he found it empty. Only the mirror betrayed the truth, and in that endless Texas night he understood he would never be driving alone again. The freight trains that roared down the tracks outside of town had a way of keeping the night restless. Even when you couldn't hear them, you could feel them, the vibrations running through the ground like some hidden animal shifting in its sleep. Most people in that part of Texas grew used to it, but for drifters and travelers who pulled off the highway at odd hours, it was a reminder that they were never quite alone out here. The little town of Elmbrook sat 10 miles north of the main interstate, its streets empty after sunset except for the gas station near the turnoff and a rusting diner that closed by 9. Beyond that, the place belonged to shadows, weeds, and the lonely hum of cicadas. But right by the railroad, tucked against a grove of pecan trees, stood the church. It wasn't marked on any map, and it wasn't tied to any denomination anyone could name. The sign out front was a plain plank of wood painted black. No words, no cross, nothing but peeling chips of paint that made it look charred. Its steeple rose crooked, the bell long gone, and the stained glass windows were so dusty that moonlight only managed to smear itself across the surface instead of shining through. No one in town admitted to going there, though the lights were seen now and again, a faint glow leaking through the cracks at midnight. The older folks said the church was built before Elmbrook even had a name, put up by a congregation that stopped coming after a fire in the early 1900s. The roof had been patched, the walls reinforced, but the story went that the fire didn't start from candles or lightning. It had come from within. Some said the people inside had all kept singing while the flames crawled over them. No one ever explained how the building survived when they didn't. Most travelers only found it by mistake. They'd miss a turn or follow a detour that didn't exist anymore. And the next thing they knew, they were coasting down a narrow gravel road with the tracks glinting on one side and that warped steeple rising on the other. More than one stranger swore the door stood open, lanterns lit inside and a soft bell chiming even though no bell hung in the tower. If they were tired or curious enough, they'd go in. That was the last decision they ever got to make. One September night, just after the heat of summer had given way to cooler winds, a man named Jacob Keller drifted off the highway. He was heading east after a job out in Midland, the kind of trucking run that left him worn down and bleary-eyed. He wasn't a religious man, not by any stretch, but when he caught sight of the church, he felt the kind of pull you don't question. His fuel gauge sat low, his thermos was empty, and he hadn't seen another pair of headlights in miles. The glow coming from inside the building seemed like a promise of company, maybe even coffee. He parked his rig along the ditch, gravel crunching under his boots as he stepped out into the chilled night. The cicadas went silent when he approached. The doors yawned open like a mouth, hinges shrieking, and a draft spilled out heavy with dust and the faint tang of smoke. Jacob hesitated, one hand still on the iron handle, and that's when he heard it. Singing, low, drawn out, the way voices sound when they're trying to keep steady against something that frightens them. He stepped inside before he had time to think. The air felt thick like he'd walked underwater. Rows of pews stretched out before him, and every one of them looked occupied. Not by people he could truly see, but by shapes darker than the gloom itself. His eyes tried to focus, but the shadows seemed to shift away, keeping form but never letting him catch detail. The singing rolled around him, vibrating in his chest, though no mouth moved. Jacob found himself walking down the center aisle, as if the hymn had caught him in its current. The cracked mirror at the far end of the hall reflected the scene, and in it he saw what wasn't visible in the room itself. Faces. Dozens of them, pale, slick with soot, their eyes open and unblinking, their mouths locked in mid-song. He stumbled, his boot heel scraping across the old wooden floor, and for the first time the singing faltered. Every shadow turned its head in his direction. The air grew hotter, like the whole place had been sealed shut and filled with smoke. He tried to turn to run back through the open door, but the door wasn't there anymore. The wall had sealed itself into rough, blackened planks. Behind him, the shapes rose, their outlines stretching up tall, necks unnaturally long, arms dangling like ropes. They didn't walk so much as tilt forward, gliding toward him. Jacob's throat worked, but no sound came out. His pulse thundered in his ears, and he felt the sharp sting of heat blooming against his skin, the way flesh feels when it's too close to a fire. In the mirror, flames blossomed, swallowing the congregation, yet their bodies didn't burn. They just sat there singing, the fire weaving around them like a veil. One of the shadows reached out, its hand a void that made the pews warp and buckle as it passed, and when it brushed against Jacob's arm, cold shot through him so strong his knees nearly buckled. The hymn changed key, lower now, vibrating through the wood, the walls, the marrow of his bones. The cracked mirror shuddered in its frame. For a second, Jacob thought he saw himself sitting among them, lips moving in perfect unison with theirs, his skin darkened and blistered. He wrenched himself away, fighting the pull with everything in him, and lurched sideways into the aisle. His shoulder rammed into the wall, and this time it gave way like brittle plaster, crumbling and spilling him out into the night. He rolled in the dirt, lungs sucking in cold air that seared after the suffocating heat inside. When he looked back, there was no hole, no door, no glow, just the dead outline of the church, black and silent. The cicadas had started up again, shrill and mocking. His rig sat right where he'd left it, its hazard lights blinking faintly. He scrambled inside, started the engine, and peeled back onto the gravel road, refusing to look in the mirrors until he was miles away. The next morning, a freight train engineer reported seeing a semi pulled along the tracks near Elmbrook. Driver slumped behind the wheel, engine still running. By the time authorities arrived, the cab was empty. Jacob Keller was never found. The only thing left was his thermos, still sitting in the cup holder, the faint smell of smoke curling up from inside it. And in Elmbrook, the church remains, waiting for the next traveler who needs a light in the dark, its pews patient, its shadows ready to sing again. On Highway 67, just past the split where the trees begin pressing close against the asphalt, there's a stretch of road truckers mutter about when they've been awake too long or when the night feels too heavy. It's not marked with any special sign, just an unremarkable ribbon of Texas highway lined with cedar, mesquite, and the kind of black night that swallows headlights whole. People say deer cross there more than anywhere else in the county, but it isn't their numbers that unsettle you. It's their eyes. The first time I heard about it was from a man named Jarvis who worked long hauls between Abilene and San Angelo. He told me over coffee in a roadside diner that he once braked hard when a buck stood in the middle of the lane. The thing didn't move. It just stared at him. He swore, with the kind of conviction that makes you uncomfortable, that its eyes weren't animal eyes at all. They were human, wet, brown, too knowing, like the kind of eyes you lock with across a bar when someone's staring too long. I didn't believe him until I drove that road myself. It was October, a cold front pushing wind down the plains. My pickup rattled against the gusts and the radio slipped in and out of static. Around midnight, my high beam swung wide around a curve, and something stood there on the shoulder. A doe, slim and nervous, angled toward the brush. I would have passed her without thinking twice, but then she turned her head. The reflection that hit me wasn't the usual sharp flare of animal retina. It was steady, flat, and unbearably human. Not just the shine, but the expression, as if behind the glassy orbs someone was trapped watching me. My stomach went cold, and I kept driving. But when I glanced into the rear view, she was standing in the road now, right where my taillights cut the night, still staring. For weeks after, I told myself I'd imagined it. Highway nights play tricks on your mind. But then, stories started trickling in from other drivers. One woman from Coleman said a whole herd blocked her path one night. They moved, slow, deliberate, like they weren't animals but people walking across the highway. She honked, rolled down her window, even shouted, but none flinched. Every head turned in unison, and she swore those eyes locked on her with the weight of a crowd watching a single performer. She couldn't move. The herd passed, vanishing into the brush, but one lagged behind. A stag with antlers so wide they looked like branches. He lingered in her high beams, his chest rising and falling. and she said she could see his lips move as if he was forming words. The sheriff in town laughs it off. He calls them drunk stories, says deer eyes always shine strange under certain angles of light. But ask him quietly, and he won't drive that stretch after sundown. Farmers along the road find carcasses sometimes, but not in the usual way. The bodies are whole, untouched, no bullet holes, no tire marks. Just collapsed in fields, their eyes missing. Not torn out, clean, empty sockets staring at the sky. One old rancher I spoke to near Bollinger swore he buried 6 like that in a single month, all within shouting distance of the highway. What unsettles me most is how they seem to know when you're tired. Jarvis once told me it happens on nights when you're already drifting, when the white lines blur and the engine hum lulls you into that dangerous half-sleep. That's when the deer step out right into the middle of the asphalt. They don't flinch. They don't leap. They just stand and wait, forcing you to slow, to look at them. And when you do, you see yourself in their gaze. Not just recognition, memory, like they know things about you they shouldn't. I had another run-in in February, driving back from San Angelo with a bed full of tools. Midnight again, colder than bone, frost forming on the edges of the windshield. I rounded a bend near an old rusted windmill and hit the brakes so hard my teeth clacked. 2 deer stood in the center of the highway. Not side by side, but perfectly aligned, one behind the other. Their eyes glowed steady, not with the quick flash of animal light, but like a porch lamp burning. The front one lifted its head slightly, and I swear on my life I heard a whisper seep into the cab of my truck, even though my windows were shut. A voice low and cracked saying my name, just my name. I couldn't move for what felt like a full minute. My heart hammered, my hands slick against the steering wheel. Then the back one stepped sideways, slow, deliberate, and the front followed. They moved into the brush, never breaking their gaze. When they disappeared, the night closed in heavier than before, like the road was emptier than it should have been. I pressed the gas, tires spitting gravel, and didn't stop until I saw lights from a gas station miles down. Lately, I've started noticing something worse, not just on the highway. At home sometimes, when I pull back the curtain at night, I catch sight of deer standing along the fence line of my property. Their bodies are still, too stiff, as if posed. And though they're too far to catch every detail, I can tell. Their eyes don't glimmer like normal animal eyes in the porch light. They reflect steady, flat, as if someone's standing out there, waiting for me to acknowledge them. Folks around here whisper. It's tied to the old burial ground the highway cuts across. Some say when the road was laid, graves were split, bones paved under asphalt. Others claim it's not the dead at all, but something older, using the deer as vessels. Watching, learning, taking. I don't know what to believe anymore, only that, when you drive that stretch alone at night, you'll feel it. The weight of those eyes, more human than they have any right to be, pulling at something deep inside you. And sometimes, when you finally manage to sleep, you'll dream of standing in the middle of the road, headlights washing over you, your legs stiff, your lips unable to move, and a car bearing down. You'll wake with the image sharp and cold in your mind, the eyes staring back at you from the dark, and they're your own. The road cut through the flat country like a scar. 2 narrow lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by endless stretches of mesquite and thornbrush. Fem 666. You'd think with a number like that, locals would whisper about devils or curses, but in South Texas, folks kept their mouths shut. They didn't put much stock in ghost stories, yet you could tell from the way they said the number, quick clipped eyes flicking away, that they knew something was wrong with it. Travelers passing through didn't. They saw it on a map as a shortcut between small towns, a farm-to-market road that shaved off an hour if you were willing to drive lonely country stretches at night. Some swore they'd never make that mistake again. The first time I drove it was in the fall, when the sun sank faster than you expected and dusk wrapped everything in a reddish haze. My gas gauge hovered at half a tank, steady as always. But when the road narrowed and the familiar highway signs disappeared, I noticed something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The trees leaned closer. The fences that had lined ranch land earlier were gone, and the telephone poles, those old wooden ones, were tilting as though bowing toward the road. their wires humming faintly in the dry wind. I figured it was just the way back roads are, half forgotten and left to rot. But then I started recognizing the same landmarks over and over again. At first it was subtle. A rusted tractor abandoned in a field, a mailbox dented on the side, leaning at an angle, a dead mesquite tree split down the middle. I thought maybe there were just a lot of broken tractors and old trees around here. But after the third or fourth loop, when the same dented mailbox appeared with the same bullet holes in the same pattern, my gut turned. I slowed down, checked my odometer, and felt my stomach drop. I'd been driving nearly 40 minutes, yet the numbers barely budged. The road stretched on endless, but I hadn't gone anywhere. The gas gauge stayed stuck at half, not moving, not even a fraction. Anyone who drives long stretches of Texas roads knows that's impossible. Even idling for that long would drop it some. I tapped the glass thinking maybe the needle was stuck, but it didn't matter. The world outside was wrong, and the road was feeding me the same loop of scenery like a broken record. It didn't help that the sky seemed to freeze too. Not pitch black, not evening, just this eternal state of twilight, that reddish blue light that comes right after the sun sets but before the stars come out. It never got darker. It never got lighter. The air stayed dry and thick like the pause before a storm that never came. My radio, which had been catching a Spanish station out of Corpus, dissolved into static, no matter how much I fiddled with the dial. It wasn't even regular static. It had a pattern to it. Like whispering underneath the white noise, words I couldn't catch but felt pressed into my skull. I passed that mailbox again, and this time I pulled over. I figured I'd gotten turned around somehow, that maybe there was a fork in the road I kept missing. The asphalt crumbled beneath my boots as I stepped out, dust kicking up in little puffs. The silence out there wasn't natural. No cicadas, no night birds, no distant coyotes, just the dry rattle of mesquite leaves and that faint electric hum from the leaning poles. The mailbox was real, though. I touched it. Cold to the point of hurting, like metal in deep winter, which didn't make sense in Texas fall heat. I turned around to mark the landscape, to prove to myself I wasn't imagining the loop, and I saw headlights crest the horizon behind me. Relief shot through me. Another driver. I waited, hand lifted, ready to wave them down, but the car never got closer. The glow stayed just over the rise, always on the edge of reaching me, yet never arriving. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, waiting for it to round the bend, but it stayed locked in place. When I blinked, it was gone altogether, as though it had never been there. That's when I climbed back in my car, heart hammering, and floored it. I drove faster, speedometer needle trembling past 70, 80. The scenery blurred, but the loop still played. Mailbox, tractor, split tree. I started screaming at the windshield, my own voice bouncing back at me in the close air. My knuckles were white on the wheel. And then, for the first time, something new appeared. A sign. Metal, bent, with flaking paint that spelled out words I didn't recognize. Not English. Not Spanish either. The letters curled and broke in strange angles. Wrong shapes that made my eyes water. I passed it, then another loop later it was gone again, replaced by the same mailbox. Like the road was teasing me, showing glimpses of somewhere else before snapping me back. That went on for hours, or maybe minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. My phone had no signal, its clock frozen at 9:17 p.m. no matter how many times I reset it. The gas gauge never shifted, still stuck at half. My throat grew raw from shouting, my eyes dry from staring at the same cursed stretch of asphalt. And then I noticed the odometer. The numbers weren't frozen. They were going backward. Slowly, tick by tick, like the car was unraveling the distance it had ever traveled, erasing every mile I'd ever driven. Something broke in me then. I slammed the brakes, screeching to a stop in the middle of the road. I left the car running, lights burning into the red-tinged dusk, and stumbled out again. My legs shook as I walked to the middle of the lane, spinning in circles. The road stretched both ways, empty, endless, no sign of anyone. But the hum from the telephone wires grew louder, almost a chant now, pulling at the edges of my mind. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was inside me already. Not words exactly, but a command. Keep driving. Keep circling. Never stop. When I finally forced myself back into the car, I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone in the back seat. I didn't look at them directly. Couldn't. But in the rearview mirror, I saw the outline of a face, pale and sharp, eyes black as the gaps between stars. They didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched. I don't remember deciding to drive again. But suddenly my foot was pressing the gas and the car surged forward, carrying me back past the same landmarks, the same loop, The same cursed half-tank of fuel. That was 3 years ago. I never left the road. At least I don't think I did. Sometimes I remember pulling over at a rest stop once or seeing a town's lights far off through the mesquite. But when I blinked, it was gone and I was back on the loop. Other drivers appear sometimes. Cars with pale figures behind the wheel, their eyes wide and blank, locked on the asphalt. None of us wave. None of us stop. We just keep circling. Headlights cutting through the eternal dusk, forever chasing exits that don't exist. If you ever find yourself on FM 666, don't take it. Doesn't matter if it's the fastest route. Doesn't matter if your GPS insists. Because once you're on it, once the road gets its hooks in you, you'll circle forever. Your tank will stay half full, your clock will stay frozen, and something will always be watching from the back seat, waiting for you to realize you're never getting off. Out in the West Texas desert, past the last gas station where the fluorescent bulbs buzz and flicker like tired fireflies, there stands a radio tower no one remembers being built. It rises from the caliche soil like a skeletal monument, its steel bones corroded by dust storms and its blinking red light pulsing against the horizon. Truckers whisper about it in cafes, saying it glows when the night is dry and the wind still, and that it hums with voices that don't belong to the living. They call it the Hollow Tower, because no matter how close you drive, no matter how many steps you take, the structure doesn't feel solid. It doesn't echo when you touch it, as if it isn't made of metal at all, but of something emptier, something hungrier. The first time I saw it was on a return trip from Pecos, where I'd been picking up parts for a busted John Deere. The highway was long, the kind of road that feels like it never curves, and my radio had started picking up static. Not the soft hiss you get when you're drifting between stations, but a kind of layered static, voices tangled inside it. I thought I heard my father's voice clear as day, even though he'd been dead for 3 years. He was singing that same Hank Williams song he used to hum under his breath when fixing carburetors, and for a second, my chest clenched the way it had at his funeral. I glanced at the radio dial, but the numbers hadn't moved. The air outside the cab turned thick, heavy like the world was holding its breath, and that's when I saw the glow off to the right. A pale, unnatural light. Not like the yellow of sodium lamps or the flash of high beams, but a bone-white shimmer that seemed to rise from the desert floor itself. The tower was humming, an electrical moan that vibrated in my teeth. My headlights swept across its crossbars, and for a moment, I could swear there were shapes clinging to the steel, shapes that shifted and blinked like they weren't bound by gravity. I pulled over against my better judgment, tires crunching on gravel. The hum got louder the second I killed the engine. The desert was dead quiet. No wind, no crickets, just that unearthly vibration filling the night. My truck door groaned when I stepped out, and then the air swallowed me whole. The glow came not from the red safety light at the top, but from inside the tower itself, as if each hollow strut was filled with light trying to push its way out. Then came the voices, not from the radio this time, but from the tower itself. My father again calling my name. Then my mother, alive but frail with cancer 2 states away, whispering words she hadn't said since I was a child. A friend from high school I hadn't thought about in years, the one who'd shot himself behind the football field bleachers. One after another, voices piled onto each other, spilling from the hollow metal like water from a cracked pipe. They weren't echoes. They were clear, directed, each one meant for me, and though my skin crawled, though my gut told me to get back in the truck and drive until my gas gauge screamed, I felt myself moving toward the base of the tower. The hum worked into my bones, syncing with my heartbeat, steady and irresistible. When I touched it, it wasn't cold metal. It was warm like flesh. The steel seemed to pulse beneath my hand, and in that instant I understood why they called it hollow. It wasn't hollow like an empty drum. It was hollow like a mouth. The glow flared bright, and I staggered back, shielding my eyes, but not before I saw faces inside the light. Not images, not tricks of reflection, but full faces pressed against the inner walls of the tower as though they were trapped behind glass. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't hear because of the roar in my ears. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the light dimmed. The tower looked ordinary again, lifeless steel in the desert. I ran back to the truck, slammed the door, twisted the key until the engine rattled awake. The radio came alive with static, and through it came a new voice, my own screaming. My voice filled with terror as if I were already trapped inside. I twisted the dial, turned off the radio, even ripped the power cord from under the dash, but the voice didn't stop. It echoed inside the cab until I was halfway back to Odessa, and then it vanished like smoke. That was 2 years ago. I didn't tell anyone, not really. Folks around here know better than to press when a man keeps quiet about something that happened on the highway. But I hear stories now, too many to ignore. A family found wandering barefoot on the shoulder of I-20, claiming their car turned itself toward the glow, and that the tower promised them their dead child's laughter if they just came closer. A trucker who followed a voice for 20 miles and drove straight into a dry arroyo, his cab burning in the night. No body inside when the sheriff arrived. The stories don't spread far, maybe because the tower doesn't want them to. It feeds on the lost, the grieving, the curious. It knows you're dead, knows the voices that can draw you in like a fish on a line, and once you hear them, it never really leaves you. Because sometimes when I park my truck at night and shut off the ignition, the hum follows me. Low, vibrating, subtle enough to pass for the refrigerator's motor or the cicadas outside. But it's there, growing louder when the desert goes quiet, whispering in the walls of my house, calling me back to the hollow tower, promising I'll see my father again if I just step inside. The diner sat low and square on the shoulder of the highway, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the fading dark of early morning. I first saw it while hauling cattle out of Midland, a pale orange sky just beginning to touch the horizon. It had one of those all-night looks, with the kind of frosted windows that throw warm rectangles across the asphalt, and I could make out the silhouettes of men bent over plates, steam rising from coffee mugs. I hadn't eaten since Amarillo, and my stomach told me this place was as good as any. The lot was half full with rigs like mine, noses angled toward the cafe like tired animals resting at a trough. When I stepped out, I noticed how quiet it was for a spot off the highway. Usually you hear the rush of tires, the endless hiss of air brakes, but there was only a stillness broken by the hum of that flickering neon that spelled simply, Diner. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee, the sort of smell that seeps into your clothes and sticks there. A waitress with a hairnet nodded me to a booth near the back. Her smile soft but her eyes strange, like she hadn't slept in years. The walls were decorated with photographs, black and white mostly, of smiling families in front of farmhouses. And every one of those smiles seemed just a little too stiff, the eyes a little too hollow. I ordered eggs, hash browns, and coffee, and while she scribbled it down, I noticed the man across the aisle watching me. He wore a trucker's cap, the kind you get free at a fuel stop, but his skin looked sallow and his lips pale. He nodded once like we both understood something unspoken, then went back to staring into his cup as though something floated in it besides coffee. The food came quick, hot and heavy, filling the booth with steam that smelled like every diner I'd ever sat in. But the taste was strange, muted like chewing cardboard dipped in oil. I forced it down anyway, more for the heat than the flavor, but with each bite I felt something sink in me, like the meal was stealing more energy than it gave. The waitress came back, set down a slip of paper that was pale as bone, and said, "Pay when you're done, honey." I glanced at it while shoveling down the last of the eggs, but it was blank. No price, no writing, nothing. Just a piece of paper smooth as skin. I thought it was a mistake, so I folded it and slipped it into my pocket. At the counter, I tried to hand her cash, but she pushed it back toward me. "You've already paid," she said, voice as flat as the desert horizon. Her eyes didn't blink, not once. When I stepped outside, the first rays of daylight cut across the lot. The rigs were gone. Every single one of them. My truck sat alone, shadow stretching long behind it, and when I turned back to the diner for the briefest second, it wasn't there. Just the highway, the gravel, the empty flatland stretching out in every direction. Then I blinked and it was standing again, humming neon and all. I climbed into my cab faster than I'd like to admit. But when I turned the key, the engine groaned like it didn't want to wake up. I pulled onto the road with my heart hammering, and in the mirror the diner shimmered like heat haze until the bend swallowed it whole. I told myself it was fatigue, maybe a trick of dawn light. Maybe I just pulled into a rest stop and dreamed half of it. But the paper in my pocket stayed. Blank, cold, smooth as ever. The more I touched it, the less like paper it felt. After 100 miles, it was warm like it had a pulse. I tossed it onto the dash and tried to forget. That night, parked at a truck stop outside Abilene, I pulled it out again. Words had appeared. Just faint impressions at first, then darker, curling letters that read, "Come back tomorrow." I stared at it until my vision swam. then shoved it back into the glove box, slammed it shut, and told myself I'd never go near that stretch again. But the thing about the road is it pulls you back. 2 weeks later, I was running loads east and I saw that glow on the horizon before dawn. The same low flicker of neon cutting through the dark. This time I didn't mean to stop. I told myself I'd keep my hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Yet my rig slowed as if the pedal had lost its spring. The steering felt soft, almost guided, and before I knew it, I was rolling back into that lot. Only my truck sat there again, but through the frosted windows I saw them. Dozens of men, truckers with tired faces all hunched over their plates, moving forks to mouths in slow mechanical rhythm. And the strangest part was I recognized some. Men I'd heard about on the CB who'd gone missing, who never made delivery, whose rigs were found abandoned on lonely stretches. I swear I saw Joe Matherly, a man who vanished 2 years back hauling out of Lubbock, bent over his coffee as though he'd been sitting there every day since. I didn't go inside that time. I shifted into reverse, heart pounding, and as soon as my headlights cut the diner's wall, the place blinked out. Just empty lot, weeds growing in gravel, the neon gone. But I knew better. I could still smell the bacon grease in my cab, still feel that greasy taste on my tongue. I drove on until the sun was up, and when I pulled into the next fuel station, I checked the glove box. The slip of paper was waiting. This time it didn't say come back. It said, "We're waiting." The letters pulsed faintly like veins under skin. I tried burning it in the trash barrel behind the station. The flame licked at it, curled the edges, but when the smoke cleared, it was whole again, lying pale and perfect at my feet. I tried tearing it, shredding it, soaking it in coffee, and still it wouldn't change. Each time I blinked, it was back in my pocket, warm against my chest, beating faintly like a second heart. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I smelled coffee and fried potatoes, heard the scrape of forks, saw that line of men chewing in endless silence. My CB began crackling at odd hours too, voices bleeding through that weren't on any channel, a chorus whispering like they were all speaking over one another, saying the same word again and again, hungry. By the third week, I gave up running east. I begged dispatch for westbound hauls, anything to keep me away from that stretch. But even then, no matter where I went, I saw the glow. Sometimes on a side road, sometimes in a field, always just at the edge of vision before dawn. I stopped checking my mirrors, stopped trusting the horizon. Still, the paper pulsed. Each time I touched it, the words had changed. Sometimes it said, "You belong here." Other times it said, "Eat." Once, in letters so faint I almost missed them, it said my name. I never told anyone. Who would believe a story about a diner that wasn't there? But I'll tell you this much. If you're ever driving the back roads before dawn, and you see a low square cafe with warm light spilling through frosted glass, don't stop. Keep your hands on the wheel, your eyes forward no matter how hungry you are, because once you eat there, they never stop waiting for you. And I think one of these mornings when the horizon's still dark and the neon hums low, I won't be able to fight it anymore. I'll park in that lot, sit down at the booth and eat, and when the sun comes up, the diner will vanish again, but this time I'll vanish with it. The blacktop of Highway 190 stretched empty under a moonless sky, a strip of faded asphalt that cut through the scrub and mesquite like a scar. Miles from any town, there stood a crooked white cross at the edge of the road, its wood splintered, leaning slightly, the paint long since flaked away by sun and storm. Truckers knew it as the shadow crossing. Some slowed when they passed, others pressed harder on the gas, unwilling to glance toward it. But they all knew the stories. It was a marker for a girl killed there decades ago, struck by a drunk driver on her way home from a dance. Her parents had put the cross up in the 70s, but it wasn't the cross that gave the place its reputation. It was what kneeled before it. They said when headlights swept across that little rise at night, the shadow of a figure appeared hunched in prayer, though no one was ever there. Worse still, some swore it lingered when the light moved on, still black against the dust and weeds as if it had life of its own. Earl Simmons was on his third long haul of the month, his rig heavy with lumber out of Louisiana and bound for Midland. The CB chatter had dried up hours earlier, and he'd been nursing bad coffee from a cracked thermos. Fatigue tugged at him like an anchor, and he had started seeing the shapes of faces in the trees, flashes of animals darting that weren't really there. He told himself he'd pull off soon and catch an hour's sleep, but the miles kept ticking and the money pressed him forward. When the sign for County Road 47 slid past, he knew what lay ahead. The shadow crossing. He'd never given it much thought before. He'd passed it maybe half a dozen times once in daylight, and saw nothing but a weather-beaten cross and dry weeds. Tonight, though, with his eyelids heavy and the road stretched like a ribbon of black water, it weighed on him differently. As the bend straightened, his headlights picked it out. The leaning white cross half buried in the roadside ditch. At first, that was all he saw, and his pulse eased. Just wooden shadow, nothing strange. Then a movement. A figure bent low, the outline unmistakable, dark against the paler earth. The shape of someone kneeling. Earl squinted, rubbed at his eyes, but it didn't vanish. It wasn't a trick of light or some tree stump. It was a shadow with no body to cast it. Shoulders hunched, head bowed. His truck roared past, headlights trailing along the weeds, yet the shape remained, crouched in still devotion. Earl felt the air in his cab go heavy, close, like a wet wool blanket pressing down. He forced his gaze ahead, jaw tight, and tried to laugh it off. Fatigue, a trick of headlights, nothing more. But in the rearview mirror, for a long, terrible instant, the figure was still there. Not by the cross now, but in the middle of the road, still kneeling as though it had shifted closer. Waiting. The glass rattled in its frame as he jolted the wheel, nearly clipping the edge of the asphalt. When he dared glance again, the road was empty. He drove harder, knuckles bone-white against the wheel, but the dread only thickened. Every reflective sign seemed to glint too bright, every patch of blackness between telephone poles too deep. He killed the radio when static rose unbidden, as though something pressed on the signal. In the silence that followed, he realized he could hear something beneath the engine's growl. A whispering soft but steady, a rhythm like prayer. He cut his eyes to the passenger seat, the floorboard, the sleeper behind him, empty. But the whispering was there, threading through the cab like smoke. Words he couldn't understand but heavy with grief. He thought of the girl, the story, her parents hammering that cross into the dirt with tears in their eyes. He thought of the shape kneeling as if caught in endless penance. The farther he drove, the worse it became. Shadows clung too long at the edge of his headlights, dragging like oil. He rolled down his window for air, but what came in wasn't the night breeze he expected. It was the scent of candle wax and lilies thick and cloying, the smell of a funeral. His chest seized and his breath came shallow. He slapped the dash, cursed, tried to drown it in curses, but the smell only grew stronger. The whispering rose to match it, curling up from the footwell of the truck like a second voice in his own chest. When the mile markers ticked toward 210, he told himself he'd pull over at the next truck stop. Just get out, splash his face, break the spell of the road. But there was no next stop. There was only darkness and fence posts and the endless stretch of asphalt. Then the cross again. The same damn cross, leaning at the same angle, weeds curled around its base. Earl slammed his brakes, tires shrieking, his load groaning against its chains. He sat there in the middle of the highway, heart hammering, staring at what should have been miles behind him. The shadow crossing. And there it was again, the figure. Closer now, not kneeling by the cross, but just off the shoulder. Head bowed, hands folded like a mourner. Even without a face, he felt its eyes. He tasted rust in his mouth, blood from where he'd bitten his tongue. The whispering filled the cab now, a woman's voice soft and cracked like someone speaking through tears. He could almost make out words, pleading words, though the language seemed older than his own. The shadow lifted its head slowly, and though there was no face, Earl knew it was looking straight into him. His hand shot to the gear shift but froze there, heavy as stone. The headlights dimmed, sputtered, and for an instant the cab was filled with black as though the night had swallowed every ounce of light. In that blackness he felt something in the cab with him. A weight in the passenger seat. A presence. Folded hands resting on invisible knees, whispering its endless prayer inches from his ear. The lights flared back on and the road was empty. The cross was gone. The figure gone. Only the night stretched before him. Earl slammed the truck into gear and drove until dawn, eyes wide, lungs burning with the effort of breathing. When he finally pulled into a rest area outside San Angelo, he sat shaking, staring at the dust on his boots. The smell of lilies still clung faintly in the cab. He swore he'd never take that route again, but others did, and they told the same story. A cross that wouldn't stay buried. A shadow that kneeled whether headlights touched it or not, and sometimes when drivers passed, it didn't stay by the roadside at all. Sometimes they said it climbed inside. On the forgotten stretch of road just outside Waco, The asphalt curved through a narrow patch of trees that locals had long since stopped using once the interstate rerouted traffic. Grass pushed up through cracks in the pavement, and the old metal guardrails had gone pale with rust. The only sounds most nights were crickets and the distant moan of freight trains, yet every morning, like clockwork, there were fresh skid marks burned into the blacktop, long curling streaks that bent sharply as if someone had wrenched the wheel in terror. The strangest part was that no wrecked cars were ever found. No shards of glass, no twisted bumpers, no tire scraps, nothing. Just the smell of scorched rubber hanging faintly in the morning air, and the marks themselves, still dark and hot to the touch before the sun burned away the dew. It became a rumor among high school kids, the kind of place they dared each other to drive through at night with their headlights off. But the older folks in Waco shook their heads if you asked about it, muttering about bad luck and things better left alone. There was an old story, half-whispered, about a pileup back in the 70s when a cattle truck jackknifed in the rain, flipping a row of cars into one another until the whole stretch looked like a battlefield. The fire that followed had been so hot it melted hubcaps into the road. Some said the county had moved the guardrail, patched the pavement, but the road never took the repair. People who lived in the scattered farmhouses nearby swore they still heard it on humid nights, the long screech of brakes, a metal crunch that carried through the trees, and sometimes, if the wind was right, the screams. Ethan found himself on that road one evening not because of a dare or local lore, but because his GPS pushed him there. He was coming back from Temple, tired after a day of welding jobs, his pickup rattling like it always did. He wasn't paying much attention until the voice on the dash told him to turn onto the county road. He frowned because he thought the app was supposed to keep him on the highway, but he shrugged. It was late, the air was thick with heat, and the thought of saving 10 minutes appealed. The first thing he noticed after turning was how quiet it became. The main road noise fell away like someone had shut a door. His headlights swept across the pale trees, and the cracked blacktop unfurled before him like something forgotten. Then he saw them. Skid marks, sharp and jagged, fresh enough that he swore he could see bits of rubber dust scattered on the shoulder. He slowed, his tires humming. Another set appeared 20 yards ahead, then another, each set different, as if car after car had fought for control and lost. Yet there wasn't a single dented post, not a single gouge in the dirt, just the marks. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. His stomach fluttered with a dread he couldn't name, but he told himself it was nonsense. Kids burning rubber at night, nothing more. Still, the air grew heavy as he drove, like static pressing down on his skin. Halfway through, his radio crackled. The old country station he kept on went fuzzy, filling the cab with white noise that rose and fell like a breath. He smacked the dial, but the sound only grew louder, almost shaping itself into words. He caught something low, urgent, a hiss stretched into syllables. His scalp prickled. Then came the first scream, faint and far off, thin like a woman's voice carried on the wind. He looked toward the tree line, headlights cutting shadows across twisted trunks, but there was nothing there. His own tires squealed as he jerked the wheel back to center. The sound died, leaving only the white hiss of static. When the deer ran out, he thought his heart stopped. A flash of pale shape leaping across the beams of his headlights, and instinct threw his foot on the brake. His tires shrieked against the asphalt, his truck veering sideways. For an instant, the world tilted and all he saw was darkness rushing toward him. Then, just as sudden, the road was empty again. No deer. Nothing. The truck shuddered to a stop, his own skid mark smoking in the hot night. His hands trembled against the steering wheel. He sat there for long minutes, chest hammering, listening. The cicadas had stopped. The night was too quiet, every sound swallowed. Slowly, he let the truck roll forward again. It was then he noticed the marks on the road were changing. The fresh black streaks behind him weren't just curving anymore. They were twisting into patterns, jagged loops like letters scrawled in a language he didn't know. He stared in the mirror, headlights bouncing off nothing, and the marks seemed to pulse, darker, alive. He pressed the accelerator, panic clawing at him. The faster he drove, the louder the static grew, until it was deafening, the voices inside it clearer now. Please, sobs, screams. Names whispered like someone was pressed against the glass of his window, calling to him. He didn't dare look. He only drove harder, praying for the end of the road, but the stretch never seemed to end. Every turn looked the same. Every guardrail bent the same way, every patch of cracked blacktop repeating. He was circling, he realized, with a sick drop in his gut, as if the road itself had swallowed him. He slammed the brakes, tires shrieking again, the smell of rubber thick in his nostrils. The smoke rose in his headlights, curling into shapes that looked almost human, faces warped and hollow-eyed. They screamed, mouths wide and black. Ethan screamed with them, and the sound vanished into the static that filled the night. When his truck was found 3 days later, it was abandoned on the shoulder, keys still in the ignition. There were no dents, no broken glass, no sign of struggle. Just the skid marks, long and black, curling around the truck in endless loops that led nowhere. The county towed it, left the road alone, but the marks kept coming back. Fresh every morning, new patterns every day. People swore the shapes spelled words if you looked long enough, warnings or names of those lost. The old stretch of road fell deeper into silence, no one daring to drive it anymore. Only the sound remained, faint but steady on humid nights. The long, endless scream of tires that never stop. I was 40 miles east of El Paso when the wind came up out of the basin and began to lean on the truck. It wasn't a storm yet, just the kind of steady push the desert keeps in its pocket. A hand on your shoulder that never feels warm. I'd been on the road since Sierra Blanca with a busted radiator strapped in the bed for a rancher who swore he'd pay me when the calves sold. The sky was drawn tight. The sun had gone down dirty, like it had been handled too much and put back crooked. You can keep your coastal sunsets. Out here, when the day ends, it looks like something got away. The last mile into any big town is where people get soft. They think they can smell the coffee or the bed or the person they're traveling to see. I'd done enough runs along I-10 to know that El Paso was different. The Franklin Mountains shoulder up like a dark wall. The big illuminated star sits on the slope and makes you think of promises. The river is a line you can cross on a bridge, but most of the time it's a quiet trench with secrets sanded smooth. You can feel the border before you see it. The air is thinner, and the checkpoints wear their own weather. Radios go strange in the same half mile. Like the wind shook the signal apart and left the pieces where birds won't touch them. I keep the CB on channel 19, because habits are like little fences that stop you from walking straight into the open. I was passing mile marker 31 when a voice came thin and breathless. Not a mayday exactly. Just a string of words pressed together as if the speaker didn't trust silence to hold them. He said there was a figure walking west in the eastbound shoulder. Said the wind was in his face and the figure walked right against it. Small. Maybe a woman, maybe a kid, maybe they were barefoot. It was hard to see. He'd slowed, thought about stopping, and then he'd watched his own hand reach for the lock. He kept going. He said he'd been a trucker 27 years and he'd never seen someone walk like that. Like the road was a treadmill that never ended. He said his headlights found the face and then didn't remember it. Like a dream you wake from too fast. The only part that stayed was the mouth, closed tight as if it had been sewn and the wind was trying to open it. I could have turned the 10 up a notch and been over the mountain sooner, heading for the lights where everything gets named and measured. That would have been smart. A smart man keeps his eyes on the white line and his hands at 10 and 2. He does not pull into the gravel shoulder where big rigs shake the ground like something under the earth wants out. He does not angle his pickup behind a gray shape that might be a person, or the wind playing at a person. A smart man knows the stories people tell at the gas pump and the taqueria. He knows about the woman who tries door handles in the night and the boy who runs without footprints. He keeps moving, the way a stream keeps moving past a rock that never moves. I pulled over. Brakes sighed. Wind tugged at my shirt when I stepped out. The smell of creosote hit me. That clean electric scent that shows up whenever the air gets a hint of rain, even if rain never comes. The highway was loud. Noise rises out there even when there are no cars, as if the pavement remembers every weight that has rolled over it and hums the memory end to end. The figure walked with the lean of someone who'd been taught to heal into storms. Short hair or hair tied back tight, a jacket too thin for the chill. No pack, no hat, no sign of a car in the median or a blown tire or anything that could explain a person putting one foot in front of the other on a night like that. "Ma'am?" I called. Because names matter and ma'am is one you can use without causing harm. "You need help." She stopped and turned with a clockwork slowness, like stopping and turning were two separate orders she had to process in order. Her face was young enough to make me think of my daughter when she was 17, and refused to leave the house without her keys clipped to her belt. There was nothing strange about the features. It wasn't her eyes or her mouth or the shape of her nose. What made something in me skip was how the wind didn't touch her the way it touched everything else. My hat brim shook. The scrub bent and complained. The grit lifted in sheets across the asphalt. On her, the air settled like a layer of clear water. It moved, but it didn't move her. She wasn't a child. She wasn't old. She was the precise age where people are invisible. Too young to be mothered by strangers. Too old to be told to go home. She had a dry, careful voice that made me think she had once practiced telling lies without being caught. "If you're going to stop, you have to commit," she said. "That's how it works." "How what works?" "The last mile," she said. "You already know it." She looked past me to the west where the mountain was a darker line and the star was off tonight. "It's louder right now. You can always hear it when the wind shifts like this. It's almost like it's talking, but it isn't. You shouldn't talk back." "I can take you into town," I said. "El Paso, there are shelters. There are lights." "Those are not for me," she said. "Those are for you. You can have all the lights you want when you drive through them and never stop. That's the trade. If you stop, the lights belong to someone else," the CB crackled. And a voice I knew from the way station at Tornillo said something about high wind advisories and overturned trailers and for all westbound to keep it moving. I could feel the message more than hear it. It skittered across my skin and left that dust-dry numbness the desert gives when it decides it is part of you now. The woman watched my mouth while I listened, as if she could see the words slide through my teeth and measure what I believed. "There's a truck stop 5 exits up," I said. "We'll make a call. I'll buy coffee. You look cold." She put her hands in her pockets like a kid blamed for something they didn't do. "Where are you going?" she asked, as if the answer mattered in a way that had nothing to do with me or her. "South side, near Isleta," I said. "I've got a delivery and then I'm done." "The last mile ends before that," she said. "You won't get there. Not if you're with me. It's a weakness I hate, that urge to prove you are not afraid of someone else's story." I opened the passenger door. The cab light threw a small yellow circle. The woman studied it like someone reading a dictionary entry for a word she already uses. She climbed in. Her jacket whispered, a sound without weight. When I closed the door, the wind noise cut hard and clear, as if it had been waiting to be on the other side of the glass. She didn't buckle the belt. She held it in her hand like a keepsake. "What's your name?" I asked as I pulled back onto the blacktop. "You don't need it," she said. "You'll call me whatever you called the last one." "Last what?" I said, already hating how small my voice sounded in that cab that had held louder conversations with oil field hands and tired ranchers and once a woman who sobbed so hard I made up a traffic jam just to give her time, you know, she said. "The last person you stopped for." "The last person who could have been me if the wind had been turned a little different. The last person you called something to keep from calling her what she was." We rolled west. The road felt changed by the presence in the seat beside me. Exit signs slid by and didn't land anywhere. When you drive out there long enough, you learn the shapes of names. You recognize the font without reading it. Fabens, Tornillo, Clint, Socorro, Isleta. They all mean distance closing and houses tucked into the flat like handprints in flour. That night the signs shone, but meaning bled out of them before it reached my eyes. The radio went dumb then too. No music, no chatter, no weather. Just the empty channel hiss that sounds like fry grease cooling, or the small soft sound a bed makes when someone rises so slowly you don't wake. "How far is the last mile?" I said. "I've driven this stretch 1,000 times. You're telling me I never noticed a mile that eats cars?" "It only eats what stops," she said. "It doesn't care about the rest. The last mile is a mile in your head that the road wears like a mask. When you step into it, the map you know gets folded and your miles go smooth while everyone else's pile up like dirty dishes. It runs right next to the regular mile. You could reach from one to the other if you knew how. Most people don't. They only understand locking the door and keeping the speed up." "You sound like someone taught you that," I said. "They tried," she said. "It didn't take." I watched the gauge cluster, not because I didn't trust the truck, but because the needles told me something about the world that was not a feeling. Oil pressure, steady. Coolant temp, steady. Fuel, half. Speed 58, then back to 62 when my ankle remembered I wasn't an old man yet. The woman sat with her hands close together, not touching, palms facing as if she were warming them at a fire no one else could see. We passed a roadside cross. Flowers tied in cellophane jolted and shivered in the air wash from a passing car. The cross leaned a little. It had a name and a year on it in permanent marker. The woman turned her face away as if the sight embarrassed her. "They mark the places wrong," she said. "People think it happened there. They think they know what the last thing was. A bend, a split second. They don't mark the place where the mile began. And where's that?" She looked at me in that quick, disconcerting way people look when they are about to lie for a good reason. "In the pocket of the person who stops," she said. The truck rode sweet through the gentle dips and rises. Out on the left, the bays were country dark, dotted with ranch lights spaced so far apart they felt like coincidences. On the right, the black ribs of barbed wire fence ran beside us and then fell back. I kept my eyes on the honey smear of the west. The thought of El Paso's lights hit me like an ache in a tooth that had been fine all day. I wanted the glow. I wanted the illusion of safety that cities hang over you. The woman watched the middle of the windshield the way some people watch the ocean. The world kinked at exit 42. I don't know a better word. It didn't tilt or flash. It folded like paper creased by an impatient hand. The green sign with white letters said Zaragoza Road and the number of the exit. And then the instant after, the letters were there, but my brain read nothing. The off-ramp was a mouth in the concrete that I knew would empty onto surface streets I had driven since I was 19. But what opened was not a frontage road. It was a band of black asphalt that took on the texture of fabric in the yellow headlight cone. A material too smooth to be rock, too quiet to be honest. And it ran straight and it ran long, and I knew it wasn't there when the sun was up. The feeling was familiar in the worst way. I had touched it once before when my wife left me a voicemail from an hour away and took 3 hours to arrive. Her voice had sounded like it was calling me from underwater, and the pop of the end of the message had made my teeth taste metallic. When she finally came through the door, she had looked surprised by the time. She had held a gas receipt with no address at the top. She had put it on the table and cried because she couldn't prove she had been anywhere at all. The woman spoke as if we had been in a conversation we had paused out of politeness. "You're in it now," she said. "I didn't make you. You made yourself." "Then I can unmake it," I said, "and turn the wheel like you do when you want to convince the truck you mean it." The shoulder appeared, but it was too even, as if drawn by a man who had never driven and thought roads were lines and plans. I eased off and on again, checking for grit under the tires, for the stray stone that rings against the frame. The sound the world made was wrong. There wasn't enough noise. Headlights filled the mirror. I could not tell if they were a mile back or a yard. They held position like a decision waiting to be made, and then they vanished like someone had cut them from the film. My palms were wet. The woman smiled without showing teeth and looked out into everything. "What happens," I said, "to the ones who stop?" She considered. "They don't all disappear the same way. Some of them never make the turn I took and walk until their feet bleed and the wind dries them. Some sit in their cars and wait to wake up and don't. Some get out and try to carry me and their backs break a little each step, and their spines remember them in the morning when they stand up to tie their shoes. A few drive me like you're doing, and we talk about how it's almost over, and then it is, but not how they hoped. You want me to take you to the river." "I want you to want to," she said, and for the first time her voice shook like maybe wanting and getting had not been the same thing for her for a long time. I saw a shape ahead where the road widened, and the black shoulder turned to crushed caliche. For a second my head gave it a name, Border Patrol checkpoint, because it knew how to fill blanks. As we got closer, it was only 2 mobile light towers set at angles, the kind work crews trailer from job to job. They were dark. Dust had skinned them a uniform gray. A portable sign faced us with nothing printed on it. Past that, the road ran without reflectors, a ribbon thrown in the dark. I asked her the question I had pretended would not come up. "How long have you been walking?" "A long time that got short," she said. "Did someone stop for you before me?" Her hands made that held close shape again. "They did. He told me he had to get home because someone would worry. He said she sat on the porch when she waited, and she kept the porch light on, and they had a cat that only came out when the light was on. It was sad in a neat way, like a room cleaned and never used. He told me he had to go, and he meant it, and he still stopped, and I got in, and we drove the last mile together. And he disappeared." "Not quite," she said. "That's the thing people get wrong when they tell it to sound brave. He made it into town. He saw the lights. He got gas, and the receipt had a number that wasn't real. And he went home, and the cat came out for the porch light, and the woman stood up, and he hugged her, and she told him she was scared because he was late. And he said he was here now, and they went inside and ate, and he told a story about the wind that wasn't very good, and he slept. And in the morning, she asked him why he hadn't come home. She didn't say it to fight. She said it because she had done the whole long night and the porch light and the cat without him. And he understood that he had not been there the way living people are there, and the house had that smell it gets when the windows have been shut too long, and when he went to kiss her, all he could smell was dust. She looked sorry for saying it. I felt my jaw clench anyway. You're telling me I'm already gone. I'm telling you the last mile takes what it needs. You know that from other things. Work, death, drought. You bargain and you learn you were never in charge of anything but how you stood when the wind hit. The light ahead shifted, enough to make me think of river water catching the glow from town. The woman sat forward, for the first time since she got in. She didn't look like a person keeping herself small in a stranger's truck. She looked like someone arriving where she had always meant to arrive. I saw the river at once and not at all. The bed was pale and wide, a scar across the land. Sand scuffed and patterned like a leaf's underside. In the center, water moved in a black ribbon. On the far bank, the city climbed. The lights arranged not by design, but by millions of private decisions. The border crossing was not a crossing. It was a line of concrete booths with no glass and no agents and no signs. The red and green lamps above each lane were off. The only sound was the wind, and it had taken on a heavier tone, as if the desert had put a hand to its throat and tried a different key. I rolled to a stop because I would not be able to say later that I had just driven through. The woman opened her door. The interior light clicked on and showed me nothing I didn't already know, except the empty seat where she had been. She had stepped out into air that did not move her hair. She looked back at me and waited. I wanted to tell her I could not do what she was asking because I was a man who paid the bill on time and returned tools to pegs and kept gas in the can for the mower. I wanted to use those small, faithful acts as a shield. I turned the key and killed the engine and got out. The entire last stretch into El Paso smelled like wet sand and torn plastic. The booths were hollow teeth in a jawline. I walked with her to the center of the road. The white line was not paint. It was a seam, and up close you could feel a temperature under it that was not air, more like heat from a living thing. The woman stood over it and closed her eyes. The wind leaned into us, steady, committed, a thing that had never been told no. What do I do? I said. Listen, she said. I heard every kind of noise. Somewhere a chain slapped a metal pole. Somewhere a piece of paper ticked against a fence. Somewhere a dog barked and the sound traveled without losing any of its corners. Underneath all that, the last mile spoke in a way I could not translate. A low, continuous letter that never ended, and in it were names not said but presented. The way you lay out your tools to know what you have. I heard my own. The short form my mother used when I was wasted by heat and needed salt and water. I heard my daughter's name like a new coin. I heard a name that I would not say because it belonged to someone who had stopped before I did. The woman opened her eyes. They were the color of the road in daylight when you drive without thinking. Because the sky is so big, the brain gives up. This is as far as you can take me, she said. Thank you. That's it, I said, feeling the foolish swell of a man who expected a sign. This is where I keep walking, she said. You will try to follow. You will put one foot over the seam and the mile will move you the way you used to move it. You will turn around because you will remember someone waiting with a porch light. And you will be able to go back to that air and fill your lungs. But the last mile will ask for what it asks and you won't get to say no. What does it ask from me? You already gave it, she said gently. It takes the part of you that believes arriving erases the road. She stepped forward. The seam brightened, a pallid glow as if calcium burned under the surface. She crossed into the emptiness that existed where the line pretended to be just paint. She didn't fade. She didn't rise. She walked. And she was smaller, and she was simply farther away than distance could explain. And then she was gone in a way that left a shape behind. Like when you stare at a light and blink and see it still. The wind pressed. The city stood at attention across the water, patient. I waited because waiting is what we do when the story wants to change without our permission. When nothing changed, I walked back to the truck. I put the key in. The engine coughed. The radio woke and chattered in Spanish about lanes and closures, then threw a border patrol advisory that felt like old tape. I checked the mirror not to see if someone was behind me, but to check whether the reflection was still mine. It was, tired and too much of the day in it. I pulled forward. I drove through booths that were not, staffed and lights that were not on, and out the other side onto a street that was called something and then called something else, because that is what streets do when people take them into their mouths. El Paso rose and rapped and offered. Houses tucked into arroyo edges. Dogs announced me to each other. A man in a hoodie crossed against the light and never looked up, which is the most living thing a person can do. I passed a bakery where men pushed racks of sweet bread and a bar where laughter spilled out, and a church with a sign telling you to bring a coat drive donation. The city did its job and made me think of safety I did not own. When I turned onto the street with my name on the mailbox and saw the porch light, it was blue like it always is in photographs taken at night when the camera guesses. The cat was there, tail up. The door opened. She was in the light. She did the small motion of relief I had, imagined 100 times, and then stopped at halfway as if someone had called her name in a different room and she had to decide which reality. Got her next breath. "You're late," she said. And in the word late was the whole of a night she had done without me. The way the desert will do the whole of a storm without the river noticing. "I'm here now," I said. I meant it the way a man means anything after he has been to a place that teaches him about the part of himself that isn't negotiable. We ate. We turned the television on and did not watch it. We went to bed and lay in the familiar arrangement that people fall into the way furniture does when you push it back and forth enough times to make grooves in the carpet. I told her in the dark about a girl walking against the wind and a checkpoint that wasn't, and how the last mile is not a piece of earth, but something that uses earth the way a mouth uses a spoon. She listened and said that was terrible, and squeezed my arm like moving blood could fix it. We fell asleep. In the morning, she asked me why I had not come home, and I realized the last mile had kept a piece of whatever it is that makes your arrival mean anything beyond your body in a chair. I tried to tell it right. I said I had been there. I said I had put the key in the bowl and sat and listened to the old refrigerator knock in its coil and watched the cat punch a moth with a soft paw. I said I had eaten and brushed my teeth and laid down and dreamed a long dream that tasted like grit. She put her hand on my chest and told me to breathe. When I did, I heard it again under the regular heart sound, a steady letter shaped by wind. It didn't hurt. It didn't make me less alive. It made me wrong in a small, permanent way, like a door hung a degree off plumb. She kissed me. "You're here now," she said, as if saying it might change where I had been. The cat rubbed the door jamb and nailed a claw and yanked it free, indignant. The light through the blinds made little separate deserts on the floor. Everything was ordinary in the way that makes you want to say grace. It did not fix what the wind had learned about me. I still drive. I pay the bills. I return the tools to the pegs and keep gas in the can for the mower. When the forecast says the wind will swing around and run like a train out of the basin, I try not to be on the road after dark. But sometimes you are in the middle of a thing, and you have to carry it to the end because you put your name on it. I keep the CB on 19. I listen to men tell each other stories that are true or might be true if the desert were kinder. Now and then someone says there is a figure walking west in the eastbound shoulder. They ask whether they should stop. The radio crackles, and the space between the words fills with the sound of paper against a fence. I could tell them a big lie or a hard truth. I could tell them the last mile is only an idea, and ideas cannot put their hands on you unless you let them. I could tell them to keep moving and save themselves and never know what it means to take weight on your back that isn't yours, and carry it anyway until your legs feel like other people's legs. I tell them to commit. If they are going to stop, they have to do it all the way. If they aren't, they have to keep their eyes forward and treat the figure like heat lightning. I say it calm. I say it like a man who knows about fences and the animals that test them. Sometimes I hear the brakes on the radio, a tender sigh. Sometimes I hear the wind as if the microphone were set out on a stake and left to gather the sound until the batteries die. The last mile asks for the part of you that believes arriving makes you yours again. If you stop, you trade that part. If you don't, you drive into town and you get all the lights you wanted and you stand in them and you still feel the wind on the side of your face you didn't turn. Either way, you are not the person who passed mile marker 31 on a night nobody else remembers. You are the person who knows the seam is there and will be there when the sun comes up and everything looks fine. When I run west and the star is lit on the mountain, I watch it like a thing that could break and fall and hit the street and leave a shape you could stand in. I look for the figure even when I tell myself I'm not looking. It always walks against the wind. It never hurries. It is the exact size of whatever you owe. If I stop, I drive the last mile. If I don't, I carry it in my pocket like a folded map that will not uncrease. Either way, when I get home, the porch light makes a blue space on the steps, and the cat comes out as if nothing in the world is stranger than a moth beating its wings to death against a screen. I put the key in the bowl. I hear the wind sing its one letter under the beat of my heart, and I think of a seam in the road that warms your palm when you touch it and refuses to tell you who is waiting on the other side.